we go. Invite sent. And then we're going to be looking at some really cool papers tonight. We've got some genetics. We have some really cool fossil science. I'm excited for it. Jaded, hi Jaded Fairy. Welcome back, Jaded. All right, let's bring on Dr. Danny.
All right.
Hi Danny, how's it going?
Hey, Belinda, it's going well. How are you doing? Can you hear me?
Ride your pants around your pants.
Can you hear me right now?
Yes, sir. Can you hear us?
I can. Perfect.
Perfect.
All
Y'all,
right.
the beauty of the live stream is half the time, we can't get the audio or video or something. How was the museum today?
Really good. Yeah. So I don't know how much I can talk about this, but an important museum meeting. We might have an exciting museum thing coming up. There might be a new museum in the San Francisco Bay Area at some point in the next few years. Yeah, we were meeting with some people about that today, and that's why I was so late to stream today, like 3 hours late, and that's also why I didn't read your paper or my paper before coming on here. So I hope it's okay that we look at these things live. This is going to be like
It's a live
an
reaction.
unboxing video, but for scientific literature, I suppose.
That's okay. That makes it fun, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I hope so. Yeah.
I mean, I'm glad the meeting went well. That's really exciting because, like you've said before, even when we've talked about other locations in the world, right? Remember last week we talked about in India the fossils that are coming, and in Africa we mentioned the possibility if there is more museums, you can drum up more interest, more collection, maybe more funding, and hopefully it'll tumble down that direction too for like the U.S. having more, fossil science and just all the items there.
Yeah. Hopefully there will be big things coming out of this, and it'll be not just a wonderful avenue for new research and new scientific discoveries, but also public outreach and getting people interested in science. We talked about that today on my stream, like the importance of dinosaur research for getting kids interested in science in the first place.
And I think I know we've talked about this in the past, but I think you're an amazing advocate for that because people are already interested for like Jurassic Park reasons, but to see a paleontologist like on Twitch in the field digging up dinosaurs or talking about them and answering questions, like my dream is that you're ushering in a next generation of scientists who are going to be paleontologists one day.
That's my dream too. Holy cow! Yeah, that's a lofty goal, and I don't dare think of myself as having that kind of an impact. But that's the dream,
I can tell you that you have that kind of impact on a lot of people. I know you have rekindled so much love of science in so many people.
I appreciate you saying that, Belinda. And again, likewise, I mean, what you're doing here is pretty incredible. It's so cool to like pull up the science and technology category like I sometimes do when I'm streaming, and so that you've got like 300 people watching. That is really awesome. And who knows the ripple effect of that? Like, how many people might go into a career in the sciences and make awesome discoveries because they happen to tune into your stream on any given day.
And likewise,
cool.
And so many like friendos on the panel too that we have that also advocates for science and beyond that as well. Science streamers here, and I feel like we're starting to get to that tipping point where it's gonna be like a lot. I feel like it has the potential to explode.
Like science is gonna become a real thing on Twitch, where like people will, when they think about Twitch, they think, oh yeah, video games and learning stuff, watching science take place on Twitch. Oh man, that would be cool.
Yeah,
that became a real phenomenon on this platform.
And his history too, like Melissa, right?
Yeah.
Melissa in Denial, and
like Melissa in Denial.
There's so many really cool things that I feel like we can really push, and for like education to be a big thing on the platform. And again, I know I say this every time, but we wouldn't be here without you. So thank you for everything you do.
I appreciate that, Belinda. Holy cow! Who knows if I'd still be here if it weren't for you and Lita and for the other science community members here. We're all in this together, you know?
It really
The
is,
rising
like,
tide lifts all science boats.
it
Yeah.
true. No, seriously, and it's one of those as people see like,
Yeah.
oh well, there's success happening, so you don't really need anyone. It's like, no, you need to pull everyone on the science front of this. And I would argue, you know, you and I, like, we both stream science and tech. Some days we stream at the same time, but we're not really competing with one another. We're working together. It's like
Exactly.
people,
Yeah.
because there's like such variance too in the science. Like, you know, dinosaurs, go to Danny. You want to do insect genetics, go to Belen. You want to do, you know, volcanoes, go to volcano. And it's like, you know, you
Yep.
can almost,
Yeah.
like, off a buffet line, you can build a little bit of a meal. It's a small meal because there's not a lot, but you can mix and match.
Sure. Yeah. Well, sometimes I'll eat a meal that'll just be, I don't know, a bag of tortilla chips or something, and like sometimes that's filling, and like, you know, it's all good. It doesn't have to be a 7-course meal. Sometimes, you know, you can fill up on bread, and that's fine.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I don't know where I'm going with that, but yeah, I guess I'm just hungry.
How long
I
do
did
we?
eat a banana. I did just eat a banana after I ended my stream, so I should be good for a few hours, Belen.
Danny, you
I
tell
wanna
me.
prepare for
You
this,
please never. I always feel like
No,
you're
we-
so kind. You're not gonna tell me when it's.
We're good. We're
Okay.
good for another couple hours here. Don't you worry. I
Okay.
got some potassium.
Excellent.
I'm fueled.
But if
Yeah.
at any point, like, please tap out.
I could probably go extra late tonight. Yeah, I think I'm good.
Okay.
I think I'm good.
So where should we start, Danny? We've got a bunch of really cool papers from this
Yeah,
week
let's
and
start with
last
your
week.
paper.
Which one would you like to start? We've got bees
The new
stealing.
one that you said was paywall. I'm going to ask you to give me the gist of that paper and kind of lead discussion on this since I didn't have an opportunity to read it.
Yeah, of
So
course,
maybe-
and it's I think
Yeah.
it's an interesting topic because I think it can relate to dinosaurs, like, but it's a lot of hypothetical as we usually talk about, where it's like this might be something, but actually
Yeah.
knowing it's something is gonna be it's a very different because if we don't have the dinosaurs to test,
Uh-huh.
you know, how can we really learn about it? So what the paper is, it's using magnetic fields for learning and movement and behavior in insects. And so
Very, very cool stuff.
yeah, I
Yeah.
thought it was really exciting. So I've got a couple of like images and papers to be able to look at because again, it seemed so unique, and I think it was a really nicely done study. It was on these silver ants, silver desert ants, and here's what they look like. There's caste differences in between them. So you've got the nurse here, and then you have a soldier with the really, really large mandibles, and they need to learn, like, to paint you a picture. If they leave the nest and they don't know where they're going and how to get back, they will die because you're in the desert. They've got, I think the estimated
Sure.
time is like 12 minutes before they need to get back in the shade.
Really?
Yeah.
Holy cow.
But they forage during the day, which is what I like from an evolution perspective. I'm like, if you're so sensitive to the heat and loss of moisture, why do you forage during the day? Why hasn't it evolved? And it seems like because a lot of their prey is actually dead insects, and so it's like,
And so that's when they catch them, is during the, like, when they can scavenge dead insects is right after they die, because it's so hot out there. That's interesting.
it's cool, right? It's like a clever little.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of a
Yeah.
backwards argument. It almost feels like, but it makes sense for them, and so
Gonna strike while the iron is hot, or while the desert is hot. I suppose.
yeah, exactly. And they're pretty. I think, you know, they're this like nice
Yeah.
silver sheen, and it's really
I can
cool.
see
As
why
if
they're
you
called silver ants.
yeah, and if you zoom in on them, they're actually very hairy, which it seems to be like the crux of most ants. They're exceptionally hairy, like far more than I ever thought they were, and it's suspected to be to prevent their overheating. So it's like
That makes sense.
the sand
Yeah.
actually touching their exoskeleton versus just touching the hair, and it doesn't, you know,
Yeah.
cause there to be damage.
Do you
So-
suspect that the silvery sheen of them is also a way to reflect sunlight, like having high albedo there It keeps them from overheating, like by just reflecting most of those UV rays.
That is my suspicion, but then I
Uh huh.
still see like the banding pattern on some of them, which
Yeah.
is like it's like a dark band, and unless I can look at it one under the microscope and figure out what it might be the tergites, which allow them to expand and contract, like the in
Uh huh.
between space, or it's for
Yeah.
some kind of other signal. But it's just interesting that
Could
there's
it
then this black banding pattern on it.
could it be for thermoregulation? Because I know you might be surprised to learn this, Belinda, but we still don't know why zebras have stripes. There's like four different competing ideas for why. Do you know about this?
I didn't know it was for. Like I always thought it was like for hunting and prey that you can't tell the numbers.
Yeah, there's one idea that it's what we call like dazzle camouflage, where like if you have a bunch of zebra all running together, that lions who see in black and white would get confused by that.
Yeah.
Like it's just overwhelming their visual senses. Um, but there's another hypothesis that the stripes evolved to confuse biting flies. That like because biting flies like who can transfer disease and stuff to zebras, that it may have evolved. Those stripes may have evolved to confuse them and keep them from landing on zebras.
Huh.
And there's another hypothesis that it is like an individual recognition kind of thing. So like zebras can identify individuals based on their stripe patterns. And then there's yet another hypothesis that it's natural air conditioning. That because the black stripes absorb heat from the sun, and the white stripes reflect the sun's rays, this basically creates like little mini convection
Mm-hmm.
air currents over the surface of the zebra's skin
Huh.
that help cool it off. And each one of these different hypotheses has certain pieces of evidence going for it, and like we don't really know which one it is, and it might even be multiple of these. But
Yeah,
I
I guess
kind of
there's no
wonder if
reason why it couldn't be just one or like multiple, right? Or
yeah,
it has to be one.
uh-huh. And if the natural air conditioning one, creating those little like convection currents, um, if that is true, then maybe that's why these ants have black stripes on otherwise silver bodies like that.
Yeah.
Maybe it has something to do with that. Since you said they can only stay outside of the nest for like 12 minutes before
I
they
I
kill
also
over.
like your idea a lot of and again this I don't know I don't think this is known, but the individual recognition component, um,
Yeah, yeah.
because there's been mathematical modeling done to suggest that fruit flies could even tell each other apart, and they don't even have stripes, right? And
They do that
so
visually
yeah,
or
like
by smell?
yep, by visual.
Wow.
Yep. It
Huh.
was this Levine lab that did it, and they did
Uh huh.
like based on the movements and the behaviors of the animals, like the model would predict that they have to be able to visually tell each other apart in order to have these behaviors, which is like
Very
it's
cool.
wild to me like that vision is so potent for an animal that
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily have that great of a vision. It's I mean, I'm not saying
Uh
that's the
huh.
only thing contributing here, but it's an interesting idea that maybe it adds to some of those differences on top of the thermoregulation and
Uh huh.
who knows what else might be happening too. Like if underground in the nest or when they're out in the wild, there's predators. Maybe it has something to do with that too.
Uh huh. Yeah. Yeah. Interesting stuff. It's again, it kind of goes back to this idea that there's so many aspects of the natural world that have not been well studied yet. Like you would think we would have a solid understanding of why zebras have stripes, and yet we don't yet. It's still a mystery, and there's so many mysteries still out there yet to be solved by like basic scientific research.
Yeah, it doesn't
Um,
it feel like it's very simple.
yeah,
It does like that's not even
yeah.
getting at genetics of it. That's not. It's just like why does this animal have a stripe
Just
pattern?
the basic nuts and bolts. What are the stripes for? We
Yeah,
don't even know that, and that's really that's wild, but it's also really exciting because it's like somebody's gonna solve that mystery.
and
And
I feel like why can't you argue for funding for that too? Like if it's a natural air
yeah,
conditioner, couldn't you
uh-huh,
design things to cool down like
yeah,
naturally? Like or I don't know if it is for like keeping flies away for immunity. Like imagine if you had like the next
uh-huh,
design for protecting people from being bitten by flies that could transmit diseases.
yep. Even if it's just like 1% more effective in keeping away biting flies, think about the millions of lives that could save, you know, every decade. It's yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So it's frustrating, but it's an exciting time to think about that. Yeah. And Sparky asked about the banding pattern for these animals. Sparky, that hasn't been worked out enough if it's different for each individual, like.
Oh, for the ants, yeah.
Yeah, and like how different is different. You know, if there's just a cursory measurement or something like where they actually model it and get really good measurements and show if there is variation between them. I don't think anyone's really looked at them. There's very few labs that study these animals, and this one that we're going to be talking about actually did a bunch of the work in the field, which I thought,
cool.
you know, has its own potential pitfalls, but it also makes, like, only because you can't necessarily control for the age of the animals or things along those lines. But at the same time, it's like, it's really cool because it's not a contrived experimental setup. Like, you are truly building something that the animals have to be able to utilize.
That's really neat.
Yeah. And so what this paper was, y'all, they actually mapped in a bunch of unique elements, but let's see, is it this one? Yeah, here we go. Oh, hold on. That's the commentary piece. Okay. So they built a very unique overhead magnetic field on top of an ant nest.
Oh, this is cool.
And yeah, it's to ask what senses the animals use to learn where they are and how to get back home. And so to begin with, like, how do they set up this kind of experiment, right? The difficulty of this is how do you do something where in the field marking individual ants and tracking them? So they did something ingenious. They dug into one side of the nest and took out some young individuals, like newly hatched. And you can tell them because they don't have that really nice metallic color. They're bright yellow. And that gives you a range of 3 to 7 days old.
Okay.
And then after those, they start darkening, like, pretty rapidly. Like, you can't tell a 10-day-old from a 3-year-old anymore based on those colors. So it's it's a nice window. And they painted a spot on them.
So they can identify them, so they can pick them out of a crowd.
Yeah, so they didn't do like an individual color spot necessarily for each one because they marked 300, but at least you know everyone's about the same age.
Everyone who is marked, yeah.
Yeah, and it turns out, like, what makes it harder is, like, these animals have this age-dependent behavior. When they're really young, they're only in the nest, and they take care of the babies. And then when they're outside the nest, they go forage for food. But what's really cool is they found out these circle pirouette patterns, they called it, like a ballerina, where a new ant, like newly hatched, that's now coming outside for its first foraging trip, leaves the nest and then does like a little circle and looks around and then does a little walk and looks around again, does a little walk, and so it's learning visually the areas around the nest.
Okay.
And
it's
like
a little panoramic photograph.
Yeah.
With little ant eyes and brain.
Yeah, which is like, it's interesting because a lot of ants aren't that visual based. A lot of them are more olfactory driven, and so you see them do these behaviors, and then if you pull out an older ant comes out who's done this trek before, they don't do these pirouettes. It's almost like they know the landscape, they go in and out, they know exactly where they need to go, and they don't need to survey the area. So it's all kind of connecting back to visual cues and then learning a memory of the insect. So again, where I thought this might be cool is they wanted to ask how can you disrupt this? What are they actually trying to learn? Like, what is the cue that's coming in? And
how do you break this to figure out how it works?
Yeah, it's like a really bad mechanic, right? Who has your car and you're like, and so they did two ways. One is they had little landmarks outside, and then the ants did these pirouettes. They identified the landmarks and they learned the path. But then if you change the landmarks, so they again had like this flavor of like a panoramic view system that they built around the whole nest site, and they changed around what the locations are, like the little landmarks.
Yeah.
Then an experienced ant would start doing these pirouettes and start looking around, even though they've already been out of the nest before. So that's again telling you that's like they're honing in on a visual cue that they learned the presence of to do their foraging behavior. And now that you've changed it, they're like they remember this isn't what it looks like. Let me readjust. And then where it got really wild was the gravity. So they built this machine that changes locally a magnetic field. And the idea is, there's animals like birds that use, the magnetic field for navigation.
Sure, yeah.
And so if we locally change the magnetic field, how does that break the system? And what they found was if they change where polar north is with this magnetic field, the young ants will learn incorrectly about locational signal.
That's really cool.
Yeah, but if you do the same trick, if you let the old ants come out after they've already learned in regular magnetic field and switch the magnetic field, it doesn't affect them. And so it's something about when you're young, using the magnetic field to kind of build like a visual map in your brain of what the landscape looks like.
Really interesting.
Yeah.
So they've got to catch the ants while they're young, and then they can kind of mess up them at that like crucial developmental stage where they're learning about they're learning the magneto topography of the area or whatever. Like if you can interrupt that, then they'll be messed up for life afterward. I guess that's the idea there.
So it doesn't seem like it's for life. It seems like they need both the visual cue as well as this magnetic cue to solidify a memory. And if they're still in this like young stage where they come back out of the nest, even though they've learned the area, they need to relearn it if you alter the magnetic field. And if you then switch it back when they come back out, they get confused again. Even if you don't.
That is really cool that they have that kind of resilience though, where they can actually learn it later on, like they can correct for their mistakes
but what's weird is it's set for a given time that there's that like the language they use in the paper is that there's this critical window, almost kind of like how humans are set to learn languages right at a certain age. It's like it's easier for them to relearn it. So if you because when you do this shifting of the electromagnetic field for an older ant who already knows the landscape, and let's say you don't change any of the visual landmarks, just the magnetic field, it does not affect the animal. So what they didn't yet figure out is, well, what's the sensory cue that's kind of communicating in here? Why is it only for young animals and not an old? And then I thought the really cool experiment is what you were getting at, Danny, is if you mess up the young animal with these magnetic field changes, like have them not learn polar north is north, but like your false north, and then have them come out when they're older, like past this critical stage, then they can't correct. It seems like that animal will get lost and actually end up dying.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, that makes a lot of sense. Very interesting, though. Shoot. And maybe I'm jumping the gun here. Maybe we haven't gotten to this part yet, but do we have a sense for how these animals are able to pick up on magnetic north? Like, because we know that or I think we've got a general understanding. Maybe it's not totally established, but like I think there's a general understanding that birds also navigate using some sort of a magnetic sense like that too. And I've heard some people say in the past that birds actually might have the biological equivalent of like metal shavings in their brain that like turn in a certain direction, almost like a compass needle.
Yeah.
What are the nuts and bolts of this? Do we have any understanding of how this works in ants, or what's going on mechanically in there that's aligning with these magnetic forces?
That is a great question, and it is not jumping the gun. It is.
Okay, great.
So this is the structure of the ant brain. Also, Hanny had a question real quick if the ants were able to communicate these locations with one another like bees do. They actually haven't done that, Hanny. When they're doing this experiment, every morning they took a tube and stuck it in the nest entrance site, and they put little ramps down for them to come in and out in an overhead camera. And every night they took it back out. So they never went inside the nest except to take out those individuals for the beginning stages to mark them. And so we don't actually know what, if any, information exchange happens in the nest versus out of the nest. So that's, Hanny, another important question to ask that we just don't know the answer to.
That also brings up a question for me, Belinda, about like ant research in general. Why is there not more video content of this kind of thing? Because this is so fascinating. Why didn't they, why aren't they posting videos of these experiments? Because that's so cool and interesting, and like that is ready-made, to use a word that I don't like very much, ready-made content right there. Like you would think that this would be really helpful in outreach and like getting people excited about ants to like show in a video how they ran these experiments, like actually inserting a tube into the nest or this big magnetic device over the nest. It sounds like it'd be very visually cool stuff.
Well, and I would say too, reproducibility wise, it would be amazing, right? To see like a guide.
If you have video documentation of how you did these experiments, that would be really valuable in a scientific sense as well.
And it's not just, I would argue also not just limited to field research. Right, even in the lab, there's some of these experimental setups are complicated, and I think they're visually cool. Like, hey, I built this maze that the mouse has to go through. Here's what it looks like when it's happening. I know part of it is that the papers, some journals don't allow supplementary video, which I think is weird. But then what would prevent you from just putting it on YouTube for your lab website, let's say?
Exactly. Or going along with the press release or whatever. I mean, you would think like a university press office would be all over that. Actually, maybe we'll take a detour here. Do you know any of these researchers? Like, have you read their work before, and what university are they from? That kind of thing.
So
what journal is this?
The journal. So it had two papers. So the follow-up paper that was behind a paywall was PNAS.
Gotcha.
And the original one that had like the original setup of how they built everything was in Journal of Comparative Physiology, Anatomy, Neuroethology, Sensory Neurobehavior. It's a long.
So it's a pretty niche journal. This is like, yeah.
It's an alphabet soup of a journal name.
Gotcha.
But the follow-up ended up in PNAS, which is still an alphabet soup, but that's like a higher tier publication, like because there they identified the neurons.
Journal.
Yeah. I mean, I think part of it, like they're from Greece. I don't know the Greece, like what the situation is with respect to science outreach. I know, as Dame Karen mentioned, like my old boss in ant research was like. SciComm is wasted on people because people are too stupid to it's like
such a backwards idea.
And I think part of the difficulty too is like in this paper they're figuring out some of the neuroscience behind this, and it seems that's a better funded question that you are to be able to answer. You have to have money for it, and it just seems like there's this not every lab, but there is a sense of almost like financial arrogance of like, because I'm like a big time in the shot, I don't need to do this kind of outreach, and the folks who get the smaller grants don't get to do this kind of level of outreach. That's like me reading into it from my experience. I don't know if that's for everyone, but that's definitely one point. And Charlie's Dragons mentioned there was with outreach, there was that video from bee researchers. There was one where bees were taught how to play soccer. And it was very simple. You gave them a sugar reward if they rolled a ball into a net. And they kept doing it. And they actually visually taught other bees to do the same thing. Or there was another one where
So
it was
those
like
bees were able to pass on that knowledge of that strategy to other bees. Like, they
visually
did a little
only
dance
too.
and
Like
showed the
that
video?
was, and it's cool. And but also you showed that, and they, the lab put over like soccer noises of like vuvuzelas and everything that you got from World Cups, and it was really
Uh-huh.
cool and clever. And so, like you're saying, I know it's frustrating that it's like the idea of generating content, but
Yeah.
it is this digestible form that makes people easily excited about science. And I think,
Yeah.
it's not every field has an aesthetically cool something. And
This
so,
does though, and it's it's a wasted opportunity. I feel, and I've seen university press offices where they'll quickly whip together a video, like a video abstract of a paper or something. And sometimes they do a really good job of it, even if the paper doesn't seem super visual or anything. And that's a way that like you can put that out with the press release so that like local news might pick up on it, or national news, or like just the other day. An old friend of mine, Bobby Bozenecker, who works on fossil whales, one of his new discoveries showed up on the Late Show with Stephen Colbert. So Stephen Colbert is talking about Bobby's work on fossil marine mammals, and I haven't actually had a chance to look at the clip yet. But it's like, if you've got good visuals and like video content, like you never know where your research will end up, and people will get more excited about it. So, yeah, yeah.
there's this lab head that we just pulled on for an advisor to a like a early career leadership committee. And the reason we
Uh-huh.
pulled him on is because he always does these press releases. He's like, every one of his papers, he gets the university involved and he does some kind of press release. And
Uh-huh.
he's like, you never know what's going to resonate with someone. And I'm like, wow, I have
Yeah.
never met someone who does this for every single one of their papers. And they even invite him to do write-ups on other people's papers now too. For like, I think he even did like the Weather Channel. Like the Weather Channel decided
Nice.
to report on a paper, and they're like, "This guy, we should ask him to do the write-up." And it was like, it's really cool
Yeah.
that you put in the time to invest in something like that.
Hmm.
And I mean, I think this paper too, like, could have done with a really nice press release, because like you said, there's
Yeah.
a nice visual component to it. I think
Uh-huh.
all of us have an interest in like how magnetic field, like magnets were cool as a kid, right? And like
Absolutely.
how
Still cool.
magnets can drive behaviors, right? And
Yeah.
so here, to get to your question, Daniel, like where's the neurons that kind of just like look at these magnetic fields?
Uh-huh.
So this lower structure here in, well, don't paywall me. they I'm like, I
Don't you
just
dare.
want the image. Here we go. So
Yeah.
this is an ant brain here. And so they're
Uh-huh.
just kind of showing you all the different structures. The eyes are going to be here on this purple region. So that pink is the retina. The purple is
Okay.
the optic lobe. And then there's neurons, right, that funnel into different parts of their brain. And the idea is like the signal must be coming from the eyes because we know it's visual. Somewhere in the brain, the processing happens for their learning, and somehow magnetic fields are affecting it.
Huh.
And so they didn't find exactly where the magnetic detectors are, but they did
Okay.
find like this here in panel C. These neurons have this molecule called corazonin. It's a neuropeptide. It turns out with age, this neuropeptide increases. And so these neurons are green here because these are the 4 neurons that produce these neuropeptides called corazonin. And in an old animal, there's tons of it. And in a young animal, there's a little bit of it. And they were able to manipulate it genetically where if those levels are artificially increased in a young animal, the magnetic fields are not affecting its learning. And like when it leaves the nest. So there's something to do with at least that neuropeptide that's influencing their ability to learn, like almost taking them out of that critical window of being able to relearn things using a magnetic field. And so like that's how far they got. They didn't show that it's not these neurons necessarily are detecting it, but it's the molecule that they're producing. And then it gets the next question is well where is that neuropeptide binding to in the brain? Like where is it signaling, or is it even staying in the brain because it's small enough where it can cross their blood-brain barrier and go somewhere in the body? And they're actually like There's examples in flies where there's a neuron that goes from the brain to the ovary, and it releases neuropeptides on the ovary, right? So it's like there's a huge next question.
Nuts.
Um,
Yeah.
But so I guess that's not really a satisfactory answer, Danny, because we don't know like what the neurons are from this magnetic field. But I think it's at least a start. Like you found at least a neuropeptide that's responsive to it, and so maybe what that neuropeptide binds to will be like a next answer in it.
Interesting. I mean, it's also exciting just in the sense that, like, well, we don't know yet. Somebody's gonna figure that out someday. Yeah. And it's neat that there is a starting point there potentially. Like, there's some inkling of where you might look, or like how you might go about answering this question.
Yeah, and they have done like a fair bit of discovery. Like this region here, they've identified that usually this is the antennal lobe, this orange ball region here versus this signal here. We used to think it was all for smell, but they discovered that a subset of those neurons are for touch, for like mechanosensation.
So like with the antennae, they're actually making physical contact.
Yeah, like you need to have a touch in order to gain information.
Yeah.
And then there's like these other ones that are for smell. And so there's a hypothesis that they had that maybe the magnetic detection is also somewhere in there.
Interesting.
I don't, that may or may not be true. But I think given what we thought was the truth, which is only smell is here, and now it's like, well, there's smell and touch.
Could be even more there.
I think so, yeah. And so, it was a neat study because it looked at aging. It looked at a unique species of ant. It was looking at it in the lab studies, lab studies for looking at the neuronal signaling, but in the field for a lot of the natural behaviors. It's like getting over how to do those, I would argue, difficult studies, because it's just not easy to do something like that in the field. And even getting at, some of the molecules that are dictating this really complicated learning and memory behavior.
Interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah, I think there's still a lot to do on it, of course, like we mentioned, in terms of, what this molecule is doing, this chorozonin, this green molecule, where it's interacting, what neurons it's interacting with, and then just your even higher level question is, like, what are the neurons or anything detecting this magnetic field? And then I guess the follow-up is, what's the difference in a young and an old individual? Why is it just not detected in the old individual, or is something dampening the signal?
And I mean, maybe also trying to reproduce these same results in other ant taxa, in other species of ants. Do you have a similar sort of thing going on? Like, how widespread is this within Hymenoptera? Could this also be a thing in wasps and bees?
Yeah, so that's I don't know. Because there's a lot, and I think this is really cool, right? Is that there are most ants are not visually driven, and so would it be something where the common ancestor? This is what I think more likely than happen is your wasps that are solitary that are flying have these big eyes, so there's almost like a need for being able to detect things in a visual manner. Maybe the ancestral state had it, and then most ants lost it. Maybe that's one possibility, right? Just because everything's more underground, and so there's not if there's not a need for it because you're not really visual.
If you can only see a millimeter in front of your face when you're down in those tunnels, then
Or the alternative hypothesis, they needed to navigate underground.
Yeah, maybe. I don't. Well, I'd argue against that probably just because we do see a tendency of animals that live underground to have decreased visual acuity. It does seem to be less important underground, but there might be exceptions to that.
Well, so I guess what if it's not visual, right? Like what if in at least these insects that magnetic detecting organ is in fact in that smelling bulb as like an additional zone? Would that be something that they're already smelling anyway, and it's just maybe the neural circuitry is a little bit wired differently, but they still have the ability to detect It's just being used for a different reason.
Is there a reason to think that it would be tied to olfactory sense? Like it might be a similar mechanism rather than visual sense? Like, is there any chance that there could be like the biological equivalent of iron filings in the eyes that are like orienting with the magnetic fields or something like that?
You know, there wasn't a good reason as to why it was olfactory.
Uh-huh.
Honestly, their only rationale was, well, we thought at one point there was olfactory only had odorants,
Uh-huh.
and now we see that there's olfactory and mechanosensation, at least in these ants. So
Yeah, yeah.
maybe there's another thing. That was the. I get the logic behind it, but there's no reason why, like you're saying, you couldn't have some kind of biological structure that's gonna help it, just like in birds.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
my question to you, like based off this paper, and I don't know if there's any way to answer this, is that would there have been any thought of magnetic field detection in dinosaurs, whether it be for migration behavior, something simple like this of like food sourcing, like because there were migrations, right?
Oh yeah, we do have good evidence that certain dinosaurs would have migrated great distances. Partly just because, like, if dinosaurs are living in big groups, especially plant-eating dinosaurs, and like they have the capacity to mow down an entire forest, like you've got to keep moving just to be able to find enough food to sustain yourself. So like they would have had to have migrated. And we know that a lot of dinosaurs had communal nesting grounds that they return to seasonally, so that requires migration back to these sites year after year. So we do have like direct evidence that certain dinosaurs migrated, and we know that modern birds migrate, and they've got, it seems like, some sort of a magnetic sense for navigation. So when did that evolve becomes the question. Did it evolve sometime like after birds split off from the rest of the dinosaurs? Like, was this a new innovation that they had, or is this an evolutionary hand-me-down? Is this something that birds they inherited from some dinosaur ancestor very early on? Like, it could be that that's something that's, you know, near the base of the dinosaur family tree that birds later inherited. It's tough to say.
Do you have a pet hypothesis or a gut feeling either way?
I think a lot of these things are often, it might go back even further than like the first dinosaurs. It could be one of those things where it's like, here's maybe a way to test that, I guess, is you try and figure out the magnetic sense for birds and figure out like what's going on there. And then if you want to figure out if their dinosaur ancestors had it too, you look for it in crocodilians.
Going back
if it
even
turns
further.
out that crocodilians, yeah, you do a phylogenetic bracket basically, like we were talking about today on my stream.
Yeah.
The extant phylogenetic bracket, because it turns out if birds have it and if crocs have it, then dinosaurs almost certainly had it too, because it probably goes back to the ancestor of all three of those. Yeah.
So does that mean we don't know if crocodilians
Yeah,
have
we
it?
don't know.
Okay.
But crocodilians are, alligators are pretty well studied in a lot of aspects of the biology. I've never heard anybody talk about magnetic sense in alligators or anything.
The only thing I really know about them is like how thermoregulation affects like their offspring in terms of like the sex.
Yeah.
Like in terms of like
their,
heavy studying.
Sex determination by temperature. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I think that only works to a certain extent too. Like, that's also a weird thing that they evolved, I think. I don't think crocodilian ancestors had that. They would have had chromosomal sex determination. And for whatever reason, that's a new thing that they evolved at some point. Because we think that dinosaurs, like their bird descendants, had, chromosomal sex determination, like ZZ and ZW sex chromosomes.
Yeah. And it makes sense that that's the ancestral state, because if naively I might imagine that having swings in temperature could be very strong effects on the population dynamics if that affects sex of the animal. Right,
Sure.
like
Yeah.
I can see maybe there's a need at some point to have it, but other times like that just seems like it could cause chaos, if anything, on the population, especially in like early Earth.
I actually don't even understand like what the advantage is to having temperature determined, sex determination. But I don't know. I don't know enough about this
So
to understand that
the
story.
theory that I've seen that I think maybe makes sense, at least to me,
Uh-huh.
is
Yeah.
they made the argument in the study that are population swings within the sexes, and they're actually like more female centric for the populations they were
Uh-huh.
studying. And so
Yeah.
it's almost like there's some kind of selection process that the animals are going for. Like they are like there's some level of awareness, it seems, like of population density and what to have. Almost like in
So it's like having more females is advantageous to a population, and that would kind of imply that like having chromosomal sex determination always gives you close to a 50-50 split.
yeah.
Um, just kind of like mechanistically, that's just how it works. So I guess, yeah, interesting. So
That
if you want to have slightly more females than males, you have to do it to find some other like rinky-dink way to do it, like using temperature or something.
yeah, which I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know, like I wasn't convinced as to why they have the original difference in those numbers. I
Uh-huh.
mean, it could be, just shooting off the hip, like survival rate of offspring, like maybe um, behavior of the males and like ranges that they have. Like it could be a lot of factors, but
Yeah.
it's I can see it also like it's if that ecology changes, it could be a disadvantage pretty quickly.
For sure. If you got a big temperature swing or an asteroid strike or something that
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
lowers temperatures temporarily dramatically. Yeah.
And
But
chat saying that
yeah.
at cursory glance there doesn't seem to be a magnetic sense in Crocs, but just as like a
Well,
cursory
but
look
nobody
at it.
studied that, I don't think. Like
Yeah.
nobody's looked for it. Would be. Oh, you know what I'm forgetting, Belen? Shoot, another migratory reptile that is, it's you got to make the bracket a little bit bigger to include it. But turtles, outside of crocodiles, are the closest living relatives of birds. Um, so turtles and dinosaurs and birds and crocodiles, they form a clade called Archelosauria. There's Archosauria, which is crocs and dinosaurs and birds,
Mm-hmm.
and then you make that a little bit bigger, and then turtles get lumped in there too. At least we think so. That's been like a recent finding. It was a mystery for a long time. Where do turtles fit? It seems like they're kind of next to crocodiles. They're closer to crocodiles than lizards are. We'll put it that way.
So
Turtles
that
are really weird. But
if we go
turtles,
with
I
that,
think, do use magnetic
yeah,
fields, don't they? Like sea turtles.
that's really
Yeah.
cool. And then that would suggest, right, that ancestral state had it. If our
Yeah.
modern birds have it, so maybe then that would suggest
Yep.
the common ancestor of crocs and dinos and birds would have it, and so on
Yep.
and so forth. So if modern crocodiles don't, it would be a loss that happened.
Yes.
Versus what
Presuming
the
that
ancestral
it
state.
evolved in the ancestor of turtles, crocodiles, birds, and dinosaurs, then any one of those that doesn't have it anymore, it would be a secondary loss there. Like they evolved away from that. They got rid of it through the evolutionary process.
And Nelf says that sea turtles have that magnite crystals in the brains.
Interesting. Yeah, I wonder how well that's been studied, because we know that sea turtles, the females will return to the same beach on which they were born to lay their own eggs, and it's thought that they use some sort of like a magnetic wayfinding kind of a thing to do that, but I don't know how well that's been studied. I don't know if we actually understand that, or if that's just something that you see in a lot of animal books and websites where it's not really backed up by research. I don't know.
What would you
Yeah.
What would you say, Danny, for that question?
Uh-huh.
Is understanding, because that's a hard thing for me to think about as well. Like, at what stage would you say that we actually understand it in that animal? Not in other, just in that like sea turtle, right? And it's like, because it's hard.
I would, first of all, like, I don't know, as a paleontologist, I'm like immediately thinking morphology. So it's like, can we look inside a turtle brain and see if they have like some sort of biological iron filings there in their brain or something, that like orient with magnetic pull. That would be a first step, I guess, and then running some experiments with them to see if you can kind of like get them to follow a magnet or do something like they did with the ants with that magnetic device in this paper. And then, but I don't know. Sea turtles in general are just not very well studied animals. Partly because I think every single living species of sea turtle is endangered. Um, and it's like there's not very many of them to study. And yeah, it's not like you can go into a laboratory and just like run an experiment with 150 sea turtles.
Yeah, I mean, because what I was thinking to really test, I would argue, is unethical. Because what
Yeah.
you'd almost have to do, I think, to really prove like what cluster of brain tissue is doing it is have a sea turtle let's keep going back to the same spot, put a
Uh-huh.
tracker on it, and get rid of the neurons that you think is responsible and see if it comes back the next time.
Yeah,
Right,
and
because
like
my
you
my
can't do
worry is
that.
like if
Yeah.
you have it in a lab
Yeah.
setting with an electric or magnetic field to change stuff,
Uh-huh.
how contrived is that?
Right. Yeah.
You know, and
Yeah.
so that's something that I think it'll be. That's why I was wondering like what would be your take on it? Like what is
hmm
convincing
How
it?
could? Yeah. When could we say that we actually understand that? And like, I don't know. I don't know enough about this subject to be able to say how much we already know, and so I don't know where the threshold is where we can say that we understand it well. Um, yeah, there's just so much I don't know. I don't know how much I don't know. That's how little I know about this.
Well, but
You
but
know?
like even if let's say the field knew much more than you and I were chatting about here, I still think like
Yeah.
the threshold for us being convinced, I think, is an interesting thing to chat about. Because like you were
Uh-huh.
saying, like from a paleontologist perspective, it's like, well, what about morphology? How do these components work? And then for me, I
Yeah.
immediately am like, well, I want to know what the neurons are doing, and I want to go into the sea turtle's brain and turn off stuff. And it's
Yep.
like,
Yep.
oh, like how easy are either of those experiments really?
Good question.
Because I
Yeah.
think, the best studied one would probably be in finches, which are like
Huh.
can be a lab organism. You can
Are
manipulate them
those
genetically.
zebra finches?
Yeah, I believe so. Like you can do
Yeah.
like lab work.
Somebody
in them.
told me the other day zebra finches are not true finches,
Oh,
which is funny. So when you just say finches, there are probably bird people who are going, zebra finches aren't finches, but it's all the same to me. I don't know. Yeah.
I guess like how a mayfly is not a true fly.
Yeah. Yeah. There you go. Not part of the
And we've got some raiders as well. Welcome in, Elfie
Oh,
Bean.
well.
Elfie Bean, how is your stream, madame? Welcome on in. We've got the lovely Elfie Bean who is playing the game Don't Starve Together. Elf, did y'all not starve together? I hope everyone was okay. Orange TJ, hello. King Neokai, welcome in. First time chatter. Ziza Reinhold, hello. Firewitch, good to see you, Firewitch. And Fragments, Elfie Bean. Guys, please go follow our friend Elfie Bean Gamer. She's also an amazing artiste. All those emotes coming in are Elfie Bean's, handmade. There's a lot of pixel art, game development, and more. Elf, I hope you had a great stream. Welcome the heck in, everybody. My name is Balint. I'm 1/3 of SciAnts streams. The other 2/3 are my wife, Lita, and our daughter, baby Alona. We're both have our PhDs in molecular and systems biology and specialize on insects. And we're joined today on our weekly crossover, Professor Danny Anduza, paleontologist extraordinaire, SciComm hero to all. Welcome on in, everybody. I hope y'all had a great stream. For those coming on in, please consider, if y'all like science, hitting the follow button, not just on here, but also on Danny's name. His name is in the channel description today. Easy to hit that heart button on. You don't even have to leave the stream. And you will forever be changed when you start learning about all things dinosaurs. Raiders, welcome the heck in. And Core Relish asks, is starving together better than starving apart? Probably worse.
Depends.
Probably worse.
I don't know. Maybe get into some Donner Party scenarios. Yeah.
Sparky says the exotic finches, often kept as cage birds, such as zebra finch, occasionally escape, are in fact not finches but wax bills, distinguished by color and canonical small bills. Gotcha. Thank you,
Very
Sparky.
cool.
Yeah, for the raiders coming in, we were talking about detection of magnetic fields as a function of behavior and how it can alter, like for ant behavior, but now we're talking about in dinosaurs and what the ancestral state could be. Meaning that, we were like, well, is it in sea turtles, which are the ancestral state of, possible common ancestor of crocs, dinos, modern day birds, and like trying to impose like, okay, based on this phylogenetic relationship, what could be the original way? And now it's coming to the point where like we don't even know, and the experiments are going to be super difficult to do.
Yeah, sea turtles are not going to be an excellent lab animal because they require huge saltwater tanks and they're endangered and they require a lot of food and they're big and like so many other things. So
Yeah, and just the
harder
testing.
you know.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Exactly. This is like the scaling issue of like lifespan and manipulability and just all of that. And Alf says Bruce is so excited that we raided out. He came into the living room. He was Bruce is the little puppers of Alfie Bean, so he pounced in on her when after the raid. Do all magnetic creatures do it differently? That's a great question, Hanny. I think
Shoot.
We don't know well enough how the ones we do know that maybe use it.
Yeah. Did each of these different things evolve independently, or do they use similar mechanisms, or even like birds and turtles? Is that homologous? Is that the same thing that they evolved and they both inherited that from their common ancestor, or is that independently evolved and it's a new innovation both times?
I mean, even in bees, Danny, you were asking about like what happens in bees, and we know magnetic fields are important because you can put them in like a big circular tunnel or like sphere and give them images that they have to fly around and navigate, and you can mess that up with changing the magnetic field. But what it is that they're using to detect in terms of their brain, no idea. So we can't even
we
make.
We think that's a brain thing and not like the iron components in their bodies and their hemoglobin numbers being drawn by the magnet, right? It's not something mechanical that's like it's messing up their orientation or navigation. We're sure of that, at least.
That's okay. Because the control experiment for that is to have the magnetic machine, but keep it polar north, but then have the flight pattern that they're trying to navigate, not going forward, so they're not just pulled, right? And there, it doesn't seem to have any kind of issue with that. But that's a good point, right? Like how much of it is, like that's important of the controls as well in doing these experiments is like, especially with behavior, because, like, if the control is having a strong effect, then how are you going to interpret your experimental? And then it's even more difficult, right, in insects because they don't have they have an open circulatory system, so no blood vessels, arteries, anything like that. So if there was any iron in their blood, like it's just free flowing.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Huh.
So I don't know. I thought it was a cool study. It's very.
Yeah, it's interesting. And you were saying that these ants seem to be more visual than other ants in general?
Yeah.
And they're living in a desert environment. Do you think that... When you say desert environment, I'm picturing these guys like scrabbling over sand dunes or like, rock surfaces under the blazing sun. Is that a correct assumption?
I have a video. Not from the researchers, nice. Because they didn't put it out. But like, this is a nice docu.
Oh, cool.
And this is kind of showing you like what their hunting behavior is. That it's not actively hunting anymore. It's they're out and about and like finding other animals that have already expired or close to expiring from the heat.
Yeah.
And so you see it's like
wasteland scavengers.
Yeah, like I think this is a nice shot. It's like the pebbles and like there's a nest entrance. And what's wild is like there's a timer that essentially starts when they leave the nest because of how hot it is, and it's like the researchers were saying they'll find ones that just ventured too far off and didn't make it back because it just got too hot.
They just got cooked.
Yeah, and it seems like when you put them outside and they need to relearn things. It's almost like those older animals that can relearn if there's visual changes, but like magnet-wise, they don't have a change. Like those seem to have more of a reason, like not come back, like ratios. Like they counted the number of animals of spots that left, but those same numbers didn't come back, which I thought was interesting. And yeah, here's just like a little. I'll post this video in chat if anyone wants to watch it. But they even have like a little docu at the end of it of how they got the footage, which is kind of just neat. Like, here's how we did the videography, and here's the locals that we chatted with, and like how we were able to get the information. They even have these like crazy setups that they build. It's a really cool animal, and honestly, like, not enough is studied on like their heat tolerance as well. I think like that's
I mean, I'm pleased that my imagination of the environment they live in is actually like pretty close to what it is. Do you feel like they have longer legs than other ants, Balint, to like help them run faster and to like elevate themselves up above the sand so they don't get cooked as fast?
That's a good question.
They look pretty leggy.
They do. So from just this angle, I couldn't tell you if it's any different, just from this angle.
Okay. Yeah.
Let me see. I can find an image. Maybe I have an image easily accessible. Leafcutter ants. Like, there's also casts there that seem super leggy. Or here's a visual. Hold on. Let me actually wrong window. Let's pull it up here. These ants are very visual. These are called the Indian jumping ants, and they also have pretty long legs. And that's not for like any kind of heat sink. Those are just, I mean, that has a jumping ability built in. But then I guess here's a soldier leafcutter ant, and it's got pretty long legs.
Okay.
But I don't know. That's is it statistically different enough for that environment? That's I'm not sure. Like, again, by eye, I don't think I can judge. But
I was also wondering too, if you say these ants are much more visual than other ants, I wonder if that has something to do with like operating in really high temperatures. I wonder if like olfactory sense doesn't work as well in like 40 degrees Celsius temps, or whether like olfactory sense takes longer than visual sense. So like if you're trying to minimize your time outside the nest, if that has something to do with it, or I don't know. Like, these are all just questions that pop into my head that.
Well, yeah, it's like I wonder if the olfactory cues can't distribute as well because you need like X amount of moisture, because like a lot of these, right, like are volatile compounds that just evaporate away, and maybe it just can't. I don't, that's
something to do with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do when I look at their brains. Here's what's kind of gets me on that. Is like these little orange balls here, that's like the olfactory center. But it doesn't. Oh, we got a raid, Danny. Welcome the heck into the lovely Cricket. Cricket, how's your stream? Grab the raid. There's a cricket infestation. Cricket, we don't have raids here because that takes out the ants as well. Cricket. Choo Choo Charles. Cricket, I would be lying to you if I say that I was not lurking on your stream. Here's my evidence. She has not yet rated out on my computer, but there she is. She's in a bathtub full of beans. Cricket, how was the bathtub full of beans? How was the game? I see Acid Muck, Graffiti Rooster, Howdy Wardy. Welcome the heck in, y'all. I hope you had an amazing stream. There's Andrew there as well. Hello, Andrew CZ. Guys, if you don't know our friend Cricket, she is one of our besto friendos. She's been here. She's got that first badge by her name since forever and a year ago. She is a gem of a human. Best laugh on Twitch. Variety games, a lot of community building. You will absolutely adore her. Ma'am, how was the stream? Tell me all the things. And Cricket's wondering, how is the fossil science genetics discussion going? It's going great. So yes, Raiders coming in. My name's Balint. I'm 1/3 of SciAnts streams. Out 2/3 are Lita and my lovely wife Lita and daughter baby Alona. Lita and I are PhD scientists with molecular systems biology for our specialty. So insect genetics, neuroscience, and more. And we're joined on Wednesday by Professor Danny Anduza, single greatest science communicator on the planet. His name is in the channel episode description. Please click on his name and follow him. Right meow. Please go follow him. He does this full time. He is the best. Yeah, we've been chatting about magnetic fields, Cricket, and how magnetic fields, when altered in an experimental setting, change behavior of ants in this paper that we're looking at. So this is an ant brain here. And then we were chatting about, well, what might have been in dinosaurs. And the way we were thinking about that was, well, what happens in birds, which are, you know, the relatives of dinosaurs. And then further relative...
Living dinosaurs. Yeah.
Yeah, of the crocs, right? The crocodilians, which are further ancestral, say, like another state removed. And then another state removed of turtles, of sea turtles. And, like, I think we're just getting to the point where we don't actually know enough of how this works.
Yeah. But I think it's important to like frame questions like this, and I think maybe show the viewers like how you frame questions like this in science, and like how you come up with testable hypotheses, because it's like what we've been doing there. This is how it works in at least in the kind of science that I do. Hopefully it is for how. Yeah,
no, and what was fun, Cricket, I think, is that Danny and I we had the question of like, okay, well, what would prove our hypothesis in sea turtles? And we had two totally different responses. And honestly, I think the answer, if there is an answer, is both of them, right?
Yeah.
And so it's super cool to have like these unique perspectives of how to answer the question. And I don't know, it probably comes to the point where we can't answer it just because of like the technical difficulties, but it's really neat to think about. And even if we get a basic understanding of how it works in sea turtles, maybe that can inform what happened in dinosaurs and even in birds, you know, like existing birds today, and like how we can work backwards of like, okay, because birds are the evolutionary descendants of the dinosaurs, how it might have worked there, what's the common ancestor, and then the crocodilian one too, like seeing where is that connection and building backwards that tree, which is it's so much fun to think about, but it's also then it's like, well, can we go test it now? I just want to go test it.
That's the joy of like understanding life on Earth from an evolutionary perspective. It's like you're actually thinking about where these things came from, and that gives you a deeper understanding of how they work and why they are how they are and that sort of thing. And like that's, oh man, I love these kinds of discussions.
It always makes me want to just like run to the lab and be like, all right, let's test this. I'm like, oh, wait a minute. I actually can't. And for the Raiders coming in, Danny noted this really important observation, I think, is that the ants that this was studied in are these desert ants, and it's extremely hot. They have about 12 minutes to get in and like leave the nest and either go back to a shaded region or go back to the nest, or they die. And so the question being is like, they look a little leggier, so maybe they do, when they walk around, they hold their bodies at different postures, and how that might correspond, like the ecology of where they live, to like physical differences in the features. Yeah, how do you wear it? It's like 40 plus degrees Celsius, so they just would roast alive. And they're actually it's weird, they're hunting during the day. They're looking for expired insects that have succumbed to the heat. And so yeah, nothing else is surviving, and now they're catching that. What is that in freedom units? Very warm.
40 degrees Celsius is like 115 Fahrenheit or something like that. 110, 115, something like that, I think.
Thank you, Danny. I get stuck in, I'm like, in the lab, everything is in Celsius, and then in real life, everything's in Fahrenheit. And I'm like, you would think that I would know how to convert between those two, but I never do. And trays, they have 6 legs. 6 legs there.
104 Fahrenheit. Thank you, Alex Vixen. Yeah. Shoot, so it was above 40 degrees centigrade this summer when I was in the field. It got up to, I think, 119 might have been the peak. 117, something like that. This summer in eastern Utah. Man, it was hot.
Wasn't there a day where the equipment also overheated?
Yeah. Part of it was that the stream encoder was like in direct sunlight. I had to move it into the shade. But yeah.
I remember we were watching and we were all panicking. We're like, no, Danny's gone. Is he okay? No, because there was the wind. Remember when the wind hit and blew everything
Yeah,
over,
yeah.
and then the stream went dead, and everyone's like, "Oh my god, is he okay?" That
Yeah,
was-
yeah. There'll probably be more of that this summer too. It's always an adventure, you know.
Those are they're the absolute best streams. Scientists working in the field. It's so
Yep.
freaking cool. Speaking of which, should we shift gears to a dino paper? Do you have time?
Should we? Okay, yeah, yeah. Speaking of field work, this next paper was, I think the lead author on it was in the field with me in Wyoming this past summer, Nick Longridge. And I should say here that um, in dinosaur paleontology, sometimes, or like in any branch of the sciences, you have colleagues that you don't necessarily agree with 100% of the time. Might have different ideas about how certain things work, and that's definitely the case here. So Nick Longridge and I have got kind of like different philosophies about dinosaur biodiversity. But we've talked before about like lumpers versus splitters. If those terms mean anything, I would be a lumper and Nick would be a splitter. And in this, he's describing, some new duck-billed dinosaurs and saying that they're definitely new species, new genera, um, based on what some people might say are very subtle differences in the bones. Um, but it's an interesting paper nonetheless, and one I have not had an opportunity to actually um, read yet. but but we can kind of go over this in real time, and it should be open access. I think
It
Nature
is. It
Scientific
is.
Reports.
Luckily, we are having an open
Yeah,
access.
good.
I
Okay.
immediately had questions just like reading the abstract as well and it's I guess getting to the point that you were just making too of like what is the splitter and
And lumper, yeah.
okay, I was like, is it lumper? I'm like, did I just it is,
Yeah.
yeah. There were some terms like already in the abstract that I was, what is this phrase here that I was looking, oh yeah, late Maastrichtian phosphates.
Uh-huh.
Like I'm just like I was just like what do these terms mean? Where I know like the goal
Yep.
is that they're saying like there's increased biodiversity because they discovered these additional dinos, but like I felt
Yeah,
like I was
yeah.
getting lost in some of the terminology and some of the methods behind it.
Yeah, so Maastrichtian it's a geological stage. So that's a time right there. That's a slice of time.
Okay.
The Maastrichtian is from the very, 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 very end of the age of dinosaurs. So
Okay.
it's the last stage at the end of the Cretaceous period. And so the asteroid hits, bam, at the end of the Maastrichtian. The Maastrichtian is when dinosaurs like T-Rex and Triceratops, Pachycephalosaurus lived in North America. But it's really cool that we've got late Maastrichtian from the very end of the age of dinosaurs, the very tail end, from North Africa now too. I was actually just talking about this with a colleague yesterday at the museum about like how few windows we have into the very end of the age of dinosaurs. The late Maastrichtian, we've got some stuff from probably Madagascar, some stuff probably from South America, like Argentina, Patagonia, a handful of stuff from Europe and maybe India, and that's really it. Well, apart from what we have in North America. It's like when we're trying to figure out what life on Earth was like at this time, we've only got a few little tiny keyholes that we can peek through, and the biggest one of those is in North America. It's in some of the rocks that I used to work in the Hell Creek Formation of Montana, and also Wyoming and the Dakotas and southern Canada. But that's like almost everything that we know about the end of the age of dinosaurs comes from those rocks in that particular place. So this is really exciting that now we've got a new hole in the fence that we can peek through, and North Africa for this particular time frame, and that's exciting.
What makes it a good site?
Could you? I'm not sure I understand your question.
Like like you said, the keyholes are pretty rare.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
and so it's partially the geography and where you're looking, presumably. Like we mentioned, like the difference between the Hell Creek Formation versus the ones in India that we were talking about last week, right? Versus like
Yeah.
the vegetation. Do you know if this is this area is like dry and almost like the
Morocco?
rocky.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, this is going to be beautiful fossil hunting territory.
Okay.
Like all kinds of exposed rock all over the place, but you know, I can drive to Montana. I can hop in the Prius and drive up. I can't drive to Morocco. It's like it's far away from a lot of paleontologists, and Morocco doesn't yet have like a big homegrown like paleontological community yet.
Mm-hmm.
There's a guy I worked with this past summer, who he's from Morocco and he's studying Moroccan dinosaurs, and he's going to be doing really cool stuff. But that's still he's a pioneer in that area. There's not a lot of Moroccan paleontologists yet, and yeah, and I'm not sure if any of these paleontologists are from Morocco. Maybe artist number 4 or author number 4 there. But
Yes.
yeah.
Natural History Museum of Morocco.
Excellent. Okay, good. I'm glad that they had at least one Moroccan author on.
Well,
this.
we were talking about that a few weeks ago too, of like the representation of like the local areas to like, give you that sense of pride, and then maybe having museums built and furthering the study in that area.
Like countries kind of taking hold of their own fossil heritage like that is I think really important, and so hopefully this is a step in that direction for Morocco.
Yeah, that's really cool. There's like this like rich area now, like because the way you describe it with the Hell Creek and like where you go and dig, you're just like, yeah, I'm just walking around and there's a bone just sticking out of the ground, and I could go ahead.
This will be like this too in Morocco. Like there will be incredible fossil specimens that are just there, just poking out of a hillside.
Yeah.
But and probably like in Montana and that part of the world, I bet you here they've also got really, really wide exposures that are like, we would say they are, I don't know, they are laterally prolific. Like they're spread over a wide area. You can find the same age of rocks, which is really important, that you don't just have like one little spot here where you can dig and then you can't really like see any geographic variation or anything because you've just got that one spot. In the American West, it's like you can travel for kilometers, and sometimes you'll be walking along the same outcrops, and sometimes it goes for hundreds of miles if you know how to look.
So by that you mean it's
geographic
like
variation there.
It's the same geological strata.
Yeah.
And so you can get like
where it's just exposed over a really wide area.
And so everywhere you dig in that zone, that's corresponding back to that particular point in time. So you get, it's almost like that's your replicate size. Like everything in this giant zone is from this time point, and hopefully you can find.
Bingo.
Gotcha. I've never thought of it like that, but that totally makes sense. That's a really, really good way of thinking about it.
Excellent. Yeah. That's important to understand. So hopefully this is the first of many, many new dinosaur discoveries from Morocco. It's exciting stuff, and like the bits that they have here are small, but they are tantalizing. Yeah.
Speaking of small, right? That's part of the new discovery, is that there is this like new dinosaur, right? That they said is the I want to make sure we get it right here, is a new dwarf Lambeosaurine, this mini Quaria bata, and they said it was mature because of a fused brain case. So, Danny, I only had enough knowledge to trigger a neuron to fire that told me that this was not appropriate. But could you tell? I forget, like how does one tell?
This is more of a matter of like opinion than it is of like, I'm not gonna say, oh, this is not appropriate, but it's, especially since like some people I've worked with are authors on this paper and everything, but there's maybe a difference in philosophy here, where if you're gonna say that a small dinosaur is a dwarf adult rather than just a young individual who happens to be smaller because it's younger, it's like you've got your work cut out for you. You've got to really demonstrate that the thing is actually mature, that it's not just small because it's young. And my method of choice for figuring out the maturity stage for a dinosaur is to cut those bones open and count the growth rings inside, you know? Which is not always possible because sometimes you get skeletal elements that don't have those beautiful growth rings. Like, there's certain bones that are better than other bones for that. Like a tibia is usually the best bone for a dinosaur. Or other limb bones are pretty good too. Skull bones are not always the best. And here they've got some skull bones. And
so why are the skull bones like less than optimal?
Because they do a lot of remodeling. So they, in order to be able to count the growth rings, those growth rings have to be there until the animal dies, without getting like remodeled or squished or like.
I see. And that's
like that,
just due to development, right? And like presumably spacing of the
yeah.
brain or like the orbital lobe or something like that is like causing there to be changes, and so it's just not as, like you said, you have to have more imputation, like more accounting for what could have also been happening versus just like elsewhere of a cut.
Yep. And a bone like a tibia doesn't have a tremendous amount of remodeling. Like, those original growth lines will still be in there as the bone grows longer and then grows a little bit, out to the sides too. It grows in length and then in width. In skull bones, I don't know if we really understand how if we have a firm understanding of like what are the specifics of how they grow, like how do they squish as they grow and stuff. That might obliterate some of those growth lines, those growth marks, as the skull bones grow. So I'm sure some people have tried to do histo using skull bones before, and I'm guessing it probably doesn't work very well. Yeah.
I like the imagery a lot too, though, of like a tibia. It's just growing, right, in these different. So you're just adding to the It's almost like tree rings, right? You're just adding to those existing layers. Versus, I mean, the skull shape isn't standard. It's not uniform throughout. So presumably, even, if you got a tibia piece, if you cut anywhere, it's going to give you a very similar answer, right?
Hopefully,
but if you cut in a skull, it can be very difficult to interpret the same number depending where you cut. Is that a fair?
Yes, absolutely. And the thing that's an even bigger consideration that I haven't mentioned yet is the skull bones are generally considered the most, like, precious. And so you don't want to cut them with a rock saw in order to, like, if you're gonna... At the museum that I was trained at, Museum of the Rockies, we would cut skull bones, we'd cut limb bones, we'd cut rib, whatever. Like, we'd almost see these things as like a renewable resource in the sense that we can go back and just go find more. Go back out to the Hell Creek. And we can always dig up more of them. It's like, use these things to collect data. That's what they're for. But when you're collecting specimens from a place like Morocco, it takes a tremendous amount of effort to get out there, and then, like, legally they might not be allowed to actually cut these fossils. Particularly because they belong, presumably, to the people of Morocco. And so you might need to, like, get extra special permission from the museum in order to be able to cut these, and they might not be willing to give that permission, especially when it's something as rare and precious as a skull bone, Yeah.
And
does that make sense?
Can you alter that if you were to, almost like the idea of flooding the market, if you had a lot of researchers in the area and all of a sudden these skulls...
If you had a dozen complete skulls of this animal, then you could.
It would be much easier.
This is, again, what we call a holotype too. So, like, this is... Are you familiar with the concept of a holotype, Bulent? Do you have this in...
So that's like what we would go back to every time to compare against. Like, this is your...
Yeah.
This is how we're defining the species. Yeah.
Yeah.
For a lot of the new
type
species...
example is what they call it, yeah.
The new species that we chat about, like, on every Friday, that's common in those papers. Like, this is now the female holotype that we're comparing everything against, and so...
Yes. Yeah.
So that makes it really hard.
A lot of museums, like a lot of museum curators or collections managers, they like have hard rules about that. They're like, if it's a holotype, you cannot cut it. You can't do anything even remotely destructive to it, even if it's to collect really important data. Like, you just cannot do that.
Is that fair,
And
do
we
you
didn't.
think?
Is it? It's a. I don't. It comes down to like a matter of opinion, I guess. It's like it's a matter of personal philosophy. At Museum of the Rockies, we would cut holotypes all the time, just like because that's what you do.
Hmm.
Um, but at other museums, especially if it's a holotype from some far off land, or if it's a historical specimen, if it's something that was collected a long, long time ago, and it's the only one, it's like good luck trying to get permission to cut that. They're never going to say yes. Um,
Is it
yeah.
something where if you cut something like this, can you just repair it afterwards with glue?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So is it?
So normally when we say you've got a shin bone, a tibia of a dinosaur, and you want to do a histo sample of it, what you do is you take a rock saw and you cut a section out of it. Maybe the section is like that thick, and then you take that section and you mold it and cast it. So you have like an exact plastic replica of that section. Um, and then you quietly put it back in the bone, you glue it, and you paint it so nobody knows. But then you've got that segment of real bone there, and you can cut it even thinner.
Hmm.
Like make a bunch of slices of it, because sometimes this is kind of a trial and error thing. You might not get it right on the first try. You embed that in resin. You grind it down so it's so thin that light can pass through it. You
Yeah.
put it on a microscope slide, and then you shine some polarized light through and look at the growth rings.
So that's
But
similar to like how we do resin embedding for an insect brain or anything. It's like you put it
Yes,
in thin resin, thin
exactly.
slice so the light can pass through. Same process
Yep.
with the
Yep.
fossil bone as well. That's I'm surprised then it's such a big controversy to cut into the holotype.
I mean, yeah, and I am too. um, but it's of course I would think this because I was trained at Museum of the Rockies, and like other people think we're crazy and we just cut everything. We kind of
Well,
do like we're just yeah.
it's like you said, it's two different schools of thought, and I'm
Uh-huh.
just, I guess, finding difficult to really see the negative.
I think if I can try and put on the hat of somebody who doesn't like cutting up specimens like that, they would say that museums exist for the purpose of keeping these specimens around for hundreds of years into the future, and the methods that we have right now in the present day might be considered super primitive 100 years from now, and they'd be like, how in the world could they cut these things up? Now we've got micro CT scanners and we can do all of this stuff in the year 2200 or whatever. We can do all of this in a non-destructive way, so let's keep the fossils around until then, when we can sample non-destructive. I think that's part of the logic there. I don't agree with that, because it's like we need to advance science now,
Yeah.
but I can kind of understand where they're coming from.
And I
That
guess
makes
too,
sense.
like, what's the threshold as well? Like, okay, we wait 100 years. Are
Yeah.
we now caught up where it's not barbaric? Because one could argue it's like, well, another 100 years from now, this might still be barbaric.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, but I mean,
Yeah.
it's an interesting discussion, just like how the school of thought works on it. I think it's really cool, and it kind of gets back to the original question, like you said. If I'm right in the paper, they did not cut into this bone, right?
They did not, as far as I know. Yeah.
So
Well, I'd be shocked if they did, because again, I haven't read the paper, but that's not really like the MO for at least for the lead author here. Yeah.
yeah, so I guess I then wanted to know, because like here are the three proposed dinosaurs that they have, right? And one of them is like
Yeah.
they're having multiple species exist at the same time, which I wanted to ask you about as well, because I feel like that's another school of thought that's going to be difficult. And then
Uh-huh.
how would you be convinced? Because I'm just a goofy insect scientist, but seeing seeing here is like what makes it this smaller dinosaur a different species or not just a younger stage of these others.
It literally just comes down, from what I understand, to fusion of the brain case.
So I
Where
guess
the others are saying that the brain case is sufficiently fused where it has to be an adult.
Okay.
which I would argue is not a good indicator of maturity.
So what I guess what does that mean? So for my lack of osteology.
So a skull is not just one bone, as you're aware of, right? Like there are here's a good example here. Protoceratops. Got a 3D printed Protoceratops skull here. And this is made up of a bunch of different bones. This is not like one solid bone. You've got your nasals right here. You've got your lacrimals. You've got your postorbitals. You've got your jugals. There's a bunch of different bones that all make up the skull. And likewise, there's like a bony case around the brain that we call the brain case. Oh, hello, Mini Pie. You want to come see the Protoceratops? Yeah. So it's almost kind of easier to understand in mammals. So like in Mini Pie right here. Let me see if I can get her to face the camera. Mammals, we tend to have pretty large brains, which is both a good thing and a bad thing. Brains can be very thirsty and wasteful. But like, if you look at a cat's skull, the majority of like the volume is like the brain. And you've got all these different bones that kind of wrap around the brain and hold it in place. And they've got little sutures that go across them, where the different bones fit together. So like people in chat are probably familiar with like the fontanelle in a human baby. It's like where you can basically like press on the skull and like, I wouldn't recommend doing this, but I guess you could like feel the brain. It's soft right there.
It is the most unsettling feeling. It is the most unsettling feeling in the world. I was like, oh my god, like no one touched my baby.
So I'm glad we thought of this because that's a beautiful illustration of this. In a human baby, you know, the bones have not met each other and fused up yet. So there's still a squishy spot right there. And that's an indicator of maturity in humans. So it's like if you've got a fontanelle that's not closed, chances are that's not an adult human, you know? But if the brain case is fused, then you could say like, oh, well, this is at least not a baby. You might not be able to say it's an adult, but yeah. And so like using Mini Pie, your tail is all wet. You stuck your tail in my water? Goodness. You pulling cat hairs out of my teeth after I drink that. So yeah, the question becomes like, is brain case fusion, because dinosaurs also have a brain case like that, is that a good indicator of maturity? I would argue that it's not. So like I've seen dinosaur specimens where like, don't drink that, Minnie. That's not for you. Stop it. No, I'm gonna take it. I've seen dinosaur specimens where like one half of the brain case is fused and the other half is not. So like even in an individual animal, it kind of falls apart.
So if you see that half fusion in the animal, does that tell you about the age of the animal or anything? Like, is that like a medium age?
I think it just tells us that like brain case fusion is not a silver bullet for being able to say whether or not an animal is mature. Because the
And Raiders, welcome on in the 8th Sage. How was your stream? I hope you had an amazing time. What were you all up to? Super Mario RPG, nice 8th Sage. Let us know how the stream went. Welcome the heck in, Raiders. My name is Belint, 1/3 of SciAnts streams. The other 2/3 are my lovely wife Lita and our daughter baby Alona. We're research scientists with our PhDs in molecular and systems biology from Dartmouth. We're joined today by Professor Danny Anduza, who is the paleontologist extraordinaire, #1 science communicator on the entirety of the internet. And we're chatting fossil science, geomagnetism, and more tonight. And we're just talking about how using...
No. Get your snot out of there. Sorry.
No. Just if there's water, they're gonna be doing that.
Oh yeah.
Let's see, a stream went well, new game, new faces, coming here to learn some science. Well, welcome the heck in, y'all. We are rabbit holing on how skull fusions might not be a definitive answer to defining the age of a dinosaur. Danny was telling us that he's found dinosaurs that have half fused skulls, and so it's not that silver bullet of having a fused skull meaning that you're in fact an older animal or younger animal. And I was going to ask you, Danny, is that something that's specific in dinosaurs, or is that like lack of a silver bullet even in, do you know if that's in modern day?
Crocodilians. Alligators do the same thing. Where like you can have an alligator that, you know, it might be pretty small and yet its skull bones have all fused together really nicely. And then you can have older alligators that, like, maybe they have certain parts of the skull that haven't fused. And maybe the right side is more fused than the left side. Like, it really can be that variable. It's kind of nuts. Like, the amount of just, you know, it could be really arbitrary, like which parts fuse before other parts. Part of that could be physiologic. It could be, like, is the animal getting enough food? It could be, is it the result of like certain stresses from living in an environment, or like, you know, if it's, I don't know. It's hard to come up with examples, but like if a crocodilian is like, always swiping to the left or something like that in order to catch prey, it's like that might have ramifications for which side of its skull fuses up faster or something like that.
So
like, there's a lot of variables there.
So meaning that, like, even though if this skull is indeed fused, right, there could be a lot of factors that cause it to fuse early, right, like relative to the rest of the size of the animal. So it wouldn't necessarily mean that it's mature. It could mean,
Sure.
like Sparky was saying, it could be something genetic, or it could be a stressor, or it could be a lot of different things.
It could even be what we call diagenetic. So diagenesis, it doesn't have anything to do with genetics. It's the like, it's like taphonomic. It's like the processes that happen to something after it dies. It's like, you know, after you die, you fall into a river and you get buried by silt, and then like, you know, worms are burrowing through your skeleton or something like that. These are all taphonomic processes, and like diagenesis is like the, you know, what happens to the rocks afterward and stuff like that. The kind of rocks that fossils are preserved in can alter, like, what those fossils are like. So, to give you an example, in, say, the Hell Creek Formation, if we find something in a fluvial environment, so like in sandy sediment that's like deposited by a flowing river or something like that, those fossils oftentimes are like in closer association. They like haven't fallen apart as much as if something found in a mudstone when it was like in the bottom of a lake or a swamp or a pond or something, where like things tend to disarticulate. It's much easier to find dinosaur skulls that are still together, that haven't fallen apart, in a sandstone fluvial environment than in a lacustrine mudstone. And it's just like the environment that they're in, like, it will make the skulls disarticulate. And so if you say, oh, well, this is definitely not fused because the bones are all separated from one another, it's like, okay, but, you know, whether or not those bones actually disarticulate or not is often dependent, like, on the environment, on the you know, the local lithology there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so it's the environment in which they're preserved in are going to change the shape. And
yeah.
that could...
That plus all the stuff that happened during the animal's lifetime,
right.
too, and
yeah,
like
yeah.
its actual fusion and everything else. So, yeah, there's a lot of variables here. It's not as simple as, oh, fused means it's an adult, unfused means it's a juvenile.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of juvenile animals probably fused up their brain cases earlier on, and we see this in modern animals too.
And so, I think there also weren't enough samples, I guess, to satisfy something like that, right? Of like getting at what the variance is. So,
I mean, they've got, I think, one specimen here.
Yeah. It's a single
one individual.
It's a single skull. That's like the idea that this is the new species. So,
which is typical.
Right.
I do want to say that is typical for dinosaurs to just have like one specimen, usually just a handful of bones, used to name a new genus or a new species. So like this is not atypical there. I wouldn't say it's ideal.
Mm-hmm.
Like ideally we'd have a bunch of individual specimens, or at least a complete skeleton or something approaching that, like a nice associated skeleton. At least here there's a skull, and that's it's not like we're naming a new dinosaur based on a single toe bone or something,
But
which
I,
happens a lot too. But yeah,
but we're trying to name it different from other dinosaurs at the same time that look similar.
yeah, and are members of the same family.
Yeah.
Like they're very, very similar dinosaurs that differ based on only very subtle differences. Like, I would argue that ontogeny plays a huge role in this because we know dinosaurs change a tremendous amount as they grow and mature. But again, this comes down to like a fundamental philosophical difference. And I talked with Nick Longridge about this at length in the field this past summer. And you just have different viewpoints on this kind of thing. It's like how you interpret the evidence in something like this when it is a little bit subjective. A lot of it just comes down to how important do you think individual variation is? Like, is Nick would probably look at modern animals. He'd look at like a few species of lizard and be like, well, we can tell these lizards apart only based on their coloration. Their skeletons are probably identical. We don't know because nobody's checked. Nobody studies lizard skeletons because you've got the whole lizard to look at. Only paleontologists really care about the bones for the most part. But anyway, he'd be like, you've got all these different lizards that are living in the same environment, and they're different only in their coloration or something like that. He's like, why shouldn't it be like that for dinosaurs as well? Where like you've got different species living in the same environment, and if you spot any skeletal differences at all, anything at all, that has to mean that they're different species, you know? Because that's what we would expect in the modern world. And I would disagree about that because, yeah, I think that for a number of different reasons, dinosaurs would have been very different from a lot of modern animals. Like a dinosaur-dominated ecosystem would be a lot different from an ecosystem dominated by mammals today, for various reasons. Ontogeny is a huge part of that. Remember, we've talked about this before, Bullet, maybe, where like mammals generally occupy the same niche for their entire lifespan.
Yeah, with the small T-Rex, right, with the fossil in the stomach of like the different.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Whereas, yeah, like with that, the small Tyrannosaur, it's like those juveniles are probably doing a different ecological job than the adults.
Which is really cool. So, like the prey, right, we were talking about are different based on what we found in their stomach content. Yeah.
Whereas like mammals today, it's like if you're one species of mammal per niche, that's it. Dinosaurs, we think, or at least people like me think, they're occupying a bunch of different niches throughout their lifespan. And so we would not expect to have as many species of dinosaur running around in a given environment, because one species might be hogging up 12 niches. It's not like you can have 12 different species of dinosaur. It's one species occupying all these different niches. And so, but Nick Longridge would probably disagree with that. And he would make some points. And yeah, I'm not saying I'm right and he's wrong, or that he's right and I'm wrong. It's an ongoing debate. And it's like, you've probably got some similar kinds of quandaries in genetics, I presume, right? Like where there's some sort of a difference of opinion, and it's like we don't know what the answer is, but like we're just looking at the problem in very, very different ways between different researchers. Can you think of an example for that, maybe?
Well, I guess butterfly migration is a big one.
Okay.
There's a school of thought that suggests that the wind is blowing them, and that's how they're doing that migratory behavior. And then the other school of thought is that there is actually like some kind of magnetic sensation of monarch butterflies that gives them a sense of direction, because they always go back to the same site in Mexico, and then flying back up north and dispersing a little bit back, but then coming back to the same site. So there's, that element to it is the big, like, one that's controversial. Another one is like Alzheimer's. That in Alzheimer's patients, there's these plaques in the brain. And some people swear by that it's these plaques that are causing the disease state. And then others have shown if you get rid of the plaques, you still have the disease state. And so they're hunting for something different and a very different angle. And I think it's probably somewhere in the middle of both of these questions. It's probably like that's what's correct. I mean, even like your lizard example, like I get why you might say like, the lizard skeletons are maybe similar and like they're different colors, so you can tell them apart. But you're not. I think my counter to that was you're not looking at a single lizard, or like three lizards that are different colors, and saying therefore all three are different, right? You're looking at like, there's 100 iguanas here that are this color, and then this other kind of iguana, there's another 100, and
yeah, you do have larger sample sizes with living animals. That's a good point.
I mean, I think that's the difficulty for me on these, and like, what you've really convinced me in all these discussions is like, sometimes you don't have replicate numbers, but there's still a good way to figure out if it's a new dinosaur or not. There's really, really strong ways of finding that out, and
well, other people would argue that there are not very strong ways for finding that out. That it's a little bit more subjective than people like me would like to admit. And playing devil's advocate here. I'm arguing against my own viewpoint. But yeah. So it's like, it's tricky, and it gets into that idea of lumpers versus splitters.
Yeah.
Where some people, when they look at two different specimens, the differences jump out to them immediately. Whereas if I look at them, the similarities are the things that really jump out to me. And it really is just like, it's kind of a fundamental philosophical difference. And the only way to solve that is just by finding a bunch of specimens and trying to test it in an objective way like that. But you can't do it with a really small sample size. Because you just end up arguing over opinions. How significant is a particular difference? Is it enough to warrant that it's a different species, or it's like, no, it's pretty subtle. They're probably the same thing.
Yeah.
It just comes down to almost a he said, she said kind of a thing at a certain point, unless you have more specimens.
Yeah. That was one of my takeaways is, I just saw, didn't know about the skull fusing component of it, but the fact that it was just one sample and it was just a smaller skull.
Yeah.
The other question I had on the same front is there's 3 different species that they're saying is in this area at this given time. Like, near the end of the age of dinosaurs, right? In your opinion, how likely is it? Let's say that let's not like talk about just the skulls here, but just in general in terms of dino ecosystems, in this one given area, 3 species of animal from the same family is
all running around at the same time. Yeah,
that on its own almost seems a little like, are you sure?
We do see this in certain dinosaur ecosystems, and in other dinosaur ecosystems we don't see it.
Okay.
So look at the Hell Creek Formation of Montana and the Dakotas. We've got one big duck-billed dinosaur called Edmontosaurus. We've got one big predatory dinosaur, Tyrannosaurus, T-Rex. We've got probably one, Pachycephalosaurus. It's like we've got one of these big animals. And then when you get down to the smaller animal sizes, you can have multiple species. Like there's that new Oviraptorosaur that we didn't talk about last week, but a friend of mine published on that.
I have the paper still.
Yeah. Where it's like, it seems like smaller body size, you can have more species just because it's easier to find different niches, maybe.
Okay.
But for like the really big animals, it seems like you just get one. And maybe that's because that one animal is occupying a bunch of different niches throughout its lifespan.
Like the spread of the T-Rex, like we talked about. Like having when you're younger, you eat this from this pile. When you're older, you're eating from this pile, and you're just kind of taking up all of it.
Yeah, that's the idea. And it's funny that you bring up T-Rex in that respect, too, because there's some people that think that the smaller Tyrannosaurus specimens from the Hell Creek are actually a different species, or a different genus, Nanotyrannus. If we talk about this
not Nanotyrannus.
Yes. Yeah, that's my grandmother here on Twitch. No, Nanotyrannus, the pygmy tyrant. One of the big proponents of that idea, that Nanotyrannus is a different Tyrannosaur animal and not just a juvenile T-Rex. One of the chief proponents of that idea is Nick Longridge, the chief author of this paper, the lead author here.
Is the evidence there as well, like a fused skull for a young animal?
Yeah. We've got better evidence than like more specimens than here
Mm-hmm.
for this paper, but it's still just a handful of specimens. At least those have got limb bones that we can cut, and every one of those has shown that the animal's not fully mature yet.
Okay, so that's a nice demonstration that it's not, like you were saying, it's not the silver bullet. Like, if they was mature, then you would have a match on both.
But there's other stuff going on too, where like Nick would probably argue that the Nano-Tyrannus specimens, well, they've got big arms. Their arms are bigger, like almost bigger than an adult T-Rex's arms, and so it's got to be a different species because, like, the arms can't possibly shrink or anything like that, which could be a solid argument. I would argue that it's heterochrony, so like Tyrannosaurus from the lower Hell Creek tend to have larger arms than Tyrannosaurus at the top because they're kind of like evolving to have smaller
Right,
arms.
they're shortening. Yeah.
Yeah, and so are these Nano-Tyrannus specimens from low end section? And generally they are. They're from the lower Hell Creek. So of course they're going to have larger arms. But yeah, I don't know. For every argument that I could make, there is a counter argument, and it kind of comes down to opinion there. And Nick Longer should also probably point out that in the Campanian stage, so before the Maastrichtian, before the extreme tail end of the Cretaceous period, you've got the Campanian stage, and in some of those environments, like up in Canada, you do get multiple species of duck-billed dinosaur living at the same time in the same place. Like you get, I think it might be Corythosaurus and Parasaurolophus living side by side. They've got different shaped crests. Maybe that's why they evolved different shaped crests, is to tell each other apart. And
like maybe
hybridizing accidentally
sexual selection,
yeah.
even.
Like a species identification kind of a deal. Yeah. But you do get that in certain environments where you get like two members of the same family living side by side, and we know that they're definitely different. So it's not unheard of to have that kind of thing, and so it gets complicated to talk about, you know.
In that scenario, when they found multiple of these animals, like you said in Canada, is there a size difference compared to the North American ones? So like further like in the Montana area, where if you compare them, like when there's two of them together, are they actually smaller versus the one that's the same family by itself? Like, is there some kind of size scaling?
They are a little bit smaller, but that might not be super informative because there's just a general trend toward getting larger. There's this idea that we have in paleontology called Cope's rule. Edward Drinker Cope kind of pointed it out. People named it after him. But it's this idea that, like, generally over time, all things being equal, a lineage of living things, like the average body size tends to increase. So like horses are a classic example of this, where like horses today are bigger than they've ever been. And the first horses, I'll show you.
Oh, the 3D print is done. Oh, nice.
Yeah. Or about this big, you know? They're about the size of a house cat. This is Eohippus right here that I finished printing last week. And and so this is see, you can tell
That's a perfect size comparison.
What do you think, Mini Pie? Yeah, that's about the same size as you. Oh, don't be scared. It's just an Eocene horse. Oh, she's scared. Don't be scared, Mini Pie. Don't be scared. Yeah, look. Look, what do you think?
Oh, she is not liking that.
Oh, I'm sorry, Minnie. It's okay. Look. It's plastic. It's a 3D print. Oh, goodness. Anyway, yeah. It's okay, Mini Pie. Look, I'll make it turn away from you. I can't see you now.
It's we have a plushie of one of our cats. It's not a stuffed cat. It's just one of our living cats. There's a plushie of her because I really love this cat. I know it's weird. It's okay. She was scandalized when she saw her plushie. She had that same look. She was like, "What on earth is this?"
It's like we were talking about iguanas today on stream, and there was a video of an iguana like somebody's pet iguana, and there was like a plush iguana that somebody put next to it, and like this one starts acting all aggressive and like puffing up his big dewlap and everything, and then he just tackles the iguana and shakes him around, and it was pretty funny. It's okay, Mini Pie. It's plastic. Look, it's okay. Don't be scared. Mini Pie is never scared. Like I've never seen her like act scared before. She's normally, nothing phases her. But shoot, I guess a horse, her size, she's like, why isn't that bigger?
Huh.
Mini Pie, it's because horses started off pretty small, and like all things being equal, there is a general trend, it seems, for lineages to increase in overall size. Yeah, there you go. It's okay. It's not gonna hurt you. Yeah.
Very suspicious.
Yeah. So like for tyrannosaurs, the biggest tyrannosaur we have is also the last one, T-Rex. For duck-billed dinosaurs, Edmontosaurus is maybe the biggest or second biggest of all the duck-billed dinosaurs. It's also the last one. Ankylosaurus is the biggest and also the last one, and et cetera and et cetera. So like the idea that that Corythosaurus and Parasaurolophus, for example, are not as big as Edmontosaurus. These slightly earlier ones are not as big as this big one that lived by itself. Maybe that is maybe there is something interesting going on there where like, that one could get bigger because it's the only one in its environment, but also we kind of expect them to get bigger over time anyway. So like, how do we separate the signal from the noise there? I don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's not what that. I guess I was trying to provide an out if we had these species and if we scaled them relative to what we see in North America with those two different ecosystems. Like, is the size ratio something that would suggest that three could be coexisting? And it sounds like that's a stretch. Yeah. That's not going to be an answer for us to really hone in on that.
Yeah, and like that, there's no silver bullet there. Yeah, and also I think here, like with this figure that you're showing right now, you've got the three silhouettes right there.
Yep.
And they're, they all look like the same animal basically, just at different growth stages. But like presumably, if these are three animals that are all living in the same environment, any environment where we've got more than one species of Lambeosaur, in the late Cretaceous, they've got different shaped crests. So these guys would probably have different shaped crests if they really are three different species living coevally. If they're
presumably
at the same time in the same place.
It's silhouetted like this because we just don't know, right, of what the differences in the silhouettes look like.
Exactly. Like if you scroll up a little bit, or scroll down, sorry, and you see that one right there. Yeah, so that's like a rough outline of like, this is what the skull, what the general outline might be, like with the actual bones superimposed there. We don't know what shape crest this animal had. Probably had some kind of crest, because Lambeosaurs generally have got a big crest on their head. But we don't know what it looked like because we don't have that part.
So this dotted line here is just a guess based on other animals that we found that maybe have more complete skulls versus like...
Yes. Other members of this family.
Yeah.
Like, if you were to draw a super generic Lambeosaur, its outline would look like that.
Okay,
that's basically what they tried to do here.
It's not that we have some kind of information from these few pieces of the skull that we can impose extra shape information. Like if this...
No, this is just like, this is a highest likelihood, just kind of like, let's spit out a generic Lambeosaur. This is the most generic Lambeosaur shape you could come up with, and that's...
So it's not like if
this is...
I have this bit here, that implies that it scales in this particular way, and it makes like this kind of bill shape.
Not really, no.
Gotcha.
Well, we can tell that it's a Lambeosaur, so we can tell that it's a member of this family. And you might say, well, it looks kind of similar to Corythosaurus or Hypacrosaurus, so let's make it look vaguely Hypacrosaurus-like. But like, you really can't go beyond that. It's not like there's some magic, little bit of thing on there where we can like, oh, well, we've never seen a dinosaur with this shaped crest, but we know its crest was this shape, even though we don't have the crest because of this. That's not how it works. Yeah.
I think we talked about that before, of like the dinosaur silhouette art and like what the similarities are and how we always downscale in terms of complexity, because if you just don't know, it's one of those. Yeah, it's
exactly.
It's frustrating. I want to know more, Danny.
I know, right? Yeah. Every one of the that's always how paleontology papers work. It's like we've got such limited information and we try and make the most of what we have. But like every paper like this, I think should always be a call to go out into the field and find more material. And so it's exciting in that sense.
Yeah. And Chef Nagin wishes us a happy Valentine's Day. We got to both meet Chef Nagin at the Twitch partner party. Yeah.
Yeah. That was awesome. Yeah. How you doing, Chef Nagin? It's good to see you.
I would like to dig up, she says, an ant-shaped dinosaur one day.
That would be tricky. We've never found a dinosaur with any more than 4 legs, and I don't think we've ever found an ant with any fewer than 6, naturally, unless
that's exactly.
They do lose legs.
Sleep well, Alex Vixen. Speaking of sleep, Danny, how much further we got you?
I don't know, maybe another 15-20 minutes, something like that. Does that work for you?
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah, shoot, it's almost 10 p.m. here. Didn't realize.
That's why I'm like, oh.
Yeah.
We're pulling Danny late tonight.
Well, that means it's almost 1 a.m. your time, Bolin. Holy cow.
I've been going until like 3 in the morning. And then I get up at like 7 or 8 and start the 9 to 5.
That's... don't burn the candle at both ends. That's not even burning the candle at both ends. That's just chucking candles headlong into a furnace.
I was gonna say it's not even balanced in any way.
Oh man,
yeah. It's this, it's like the dream of making it, full time, and I think we're blessed enough to have this front page feature, and I was just like, the community got us here. I'm gonna maximize it, and we did last week. We did, as you say, 8 days a week because we went fossil hunting for Lita's birthday on Saturday, and then Lita streamed again on Saturday night, and it was just like, we just gotta keep going and getting excited people
8
about
streams
science.
In 1 week. If there's one time to just go all out, I guess while you're on the front page that's the time. So
that's the and then like we've talked about, everyone else will be pulled up on the science front of it. That's the goal.
Yeah.
I practice his name for day. I know you, Chef. You practice Paleo's name all the time, and I'm glad that you're following Danny now.
Oh, Chef Nagin. Yeah, paleontologizing, like paleontology, but making it a verb. Yeah. Anyway,
I think it's hard too because
there are other paleontologists, like Jim Kirkland, who was working with this summer, the state paleontologist of Utah. Every time he tries to say paleontologizing, he's like paleontologizing. It's like, Jim, you're a paleontologist. It's not that different from your job title, but sometimes those extra syllables really get people, and I understand that. I'm not going to blame anybody for that.
I get sometimes confused because on Twitter you have the G dropped.
Yeah.
And then so I'm like, wait a minute.
Character count.
Yeah. Wait, which one is it?
Yeah.
I'll be sitting here, I'm like trying to do a shout out. I'm like, wait a minute. Where's the one letter that I'm missing on here?
Yeah.
But I mean, listen. I remember when we had the very first username. If you remember, after the 2 rebrands, we had.
Yeah.
My last name was B Cacho, right? I remember you rated us. I'm like, good God, how's this poor guy gonna spell it? No one knows what it is.
What did I used to call you? BKA?
Yeah, I don't even remember. Remember. I think we just switched it to Balent. You're just like, all right, I know his name now. We're just gonna ignore the name here. Which is, I mean, we weren't planning on streaming originally, so it's.
Yep. And I don't know, it's not as bad as when Amanda Freckled Science started streaming. For a long time, her Twitch handle was Frecked Science. She forgot the L. And she was stuck with it for like 60 days or something. And stuff like this happens. It happens to scientists as well, like Amanda. So yeah, yeah,
Exactly, the one time though can define you forever.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. Oh boy.
Although you could have always played it off as like, yeah, it's a Battlestar Galactica reference. It's fine.
There you go. Yeah, yeah.
Um, so yeah, just like rounding out this paper, I thought it was neat that they did show, like the teeth on here, and
Aren't
I
those
guess I had
gorgeous? Yeah.
a greater appreciation for it because we've talked so much about teeth in the past, like as a
Uh-huh.
function of what the animals ate, right, and how important it was
Yeah,
to look
yeah.
at the teeth. And I was wondering
Uh-huh.
if you knew or you suspected as they were looking at these like either a juvenile or a new
Uh-huh.
species of smaller dino.
Yeah.
In mammals, like we can look at teeth and kind of get information about the age. Is
Yep,
that
yep.
something that they could have done here, or is that also like not a silver bullet? Like, it's a difficult thing to do.
Dinosaur teeth are not informative like that.
Really?
Yeah,
Okay.
so mammal teeth, like, I don't know. I would, as a dinosaur paleontologist, sometimes I gently rib the mammal people. Be like you don't actually study you just study you're a tooth scientist. Like, you don't study mammals, you just study mammal teeth. Because so much of mammal paleontology, especially in the Mesozoic, is just looking at their teeth. Sometimes because that's all you have. Um, but mammal teeth evolve really quickly, and they evolve in pretty dramatic ways. And I think part of that is that mammals just have two sets of teeth for their whole lives. Like, we as humans, we've got our baby teeth and our adult teeth, and then we're done. Dinosaurs are not like that. Dinosaurs are just constantly churning out new teeth all the time. They're replacing their old teeth, and they're just, it's like a constant conveyor belt of teeth. And the teeth are like generally kind of lower quality than mammal teeth. They're just not as scientifically informative either.
Is it that
So
they're constantly being produced, or is it that they just have a? Is it like looking in a like a shark jaw, where there's just like tons, like constantly coming in, or is it like they're constantly being
I mean,
produced?
sharks do the same thing. We're like, yeah, sharks are constantly replacing their teeth all the time too. Although I think the mechanism's a little bit different with sharks, where they kind of like fold up from the back.
Yeah,
Yeah, with dinosaurs, they come up from the inside of the jaw.
I
So
see.
like
So
a
like,
tooth will come in and push out the old tooth
so
as
presumably
that tooth erupts.
it's constant production, but not like a conveyor belt like a shark has, but rather like
Yeah, that was a
here's.
bad analogy I used. Sorry. Yeah,
No, no, no.
bad
I'm just
bad metaphor.
naive questions, Danny. I just want to
No,
know.
no, no. Yeah, yeah. So it's here. I can show you an example actually. Where did I put that megalosaur jaw? Hang on a second. Um,
Nelf, I like that. Yeah, like an elevator popping out.
I do like that too. Yeah, yeah. Or like, does anybody remember those ice creams from when you were a kid? A push pop, where you like
Yeah.
push it. Yeah, yeah. It's kind of like that. Yeah. Um, this is a really, really important fossil specimen. This is my 3D print of it, but this was the first dinosaur jaw ever scientifically published, way back in 1824, 200 years ago. This is the lower jaw of Megalosaurus, which was the first dinosaur ever named. And one of the reasons why William Buckland, the guy who studied this, was able to determine that it was from a giant reptile, nobody knew it about dinosaurs. Like, it's one of the first dinosaur specimens ever scientifically published. It's got these teeth that are erupting from the jaw, like in a crocodile or like in a lizard, where like you've got these teeth in here that are kind of coming up, and then you've got teeth that are already there. And so, like, actually in here you've got one tooth that's getting ready to push this tooth out. Um, this is like a pattern that dinosaurs have and that other reptiles have that mammals don't. Mammals have just got two sets of teeth for their whole lives, and then they're done.
Gotcha. And then the teeth themselves, because they're constantly being pushed out, you might get a sense of the age of that one tooth, but not
Yeah.
of informing in what stage that animal is. Because I guess I know
Yeah.
with sharks,
So
we know.
mammals hold onto their teeth for a really, really long time.
Yeah.
And so like you can even do histo of mammal teeth, and you can figure out like how old they were, or like by the way the teeth are worn down. Because like a mammal will have its teeth for its full adult life, Dinosaurs are not like that. They're just, their teeth are disposable. And as a result, they're also like lower quality than mammal teeth, since mammals have to hold on to their teeth for their whole life. Like they invest a lot of metabolic energy in making sure that those teeth are really resilient. Um, Dinosaurs didn't do that because they didn't have to. They're just constantly churning out new teeth all the time. Yeah. Yeah.
The
Sorry,
biology.
I interrupted you.
No. Just the biology behind that is really cool because, like in sharks, there's
Yeah.
constant like stem cells that are in the mandible that allow the facilitation of like the more teeth being formed. So it's neat to think about what stem cell populations then must be like in the jaws of dinosaurs that allow something like that to happen. And I wonder, like with the reverse evolution experiment with the chickens, right, that we can create the teeth for them. I wonder if I don't know enough about the literature on that, but if those teeth that are like re-engineered in the chicken, if those also turn over at the same rate, if you needed to reactivate
good question.
The stem cells populations there.
I don't know. That's a really good question. I'm not sure. Yeah. I've never thought about stem cells, but
Goodness, and we got another raid in for our friend Turgus86. Turgus, how was your stream? Welcome on in. Tell us all the things. Playing Chrono Trigger. Very nice. Turgus, I did not know you were going live today. I'm not happy about this, my friend. I was supposed to tell me, Turgus. Guys, Turgus recently just came back to streaming, has been doing a lot of emotes, their own artwork, playing games. Please welcome them back to Twitch by dropping them a follow. Turgus, how was Chrono Trigger? Tell us all the things. For the Raiders coming on in, my name is Belent. 1/3 of SciAnts streams, the other 2/3 are both asleep. Lita and baby Alona were research scientists, our PhDs in molecular biology, and we're joined by Professor Danny Anduza, single greatest science communicator on the internet. And as he shakes his head, and we're talking genetics, fossil science, and more. In particular, right now we're focusing on dinosaur teeth and how they're actually not informative because the teeth turn over so often, almost like shark teeth, which I'm like, no, this is frustrating. Why has it got to be this way?
Yep.
We got first time chatter, a butt tuba, I like the name. So I was figuring out the stuff. I was testing my stream setup, and friends jumped in, so I played more than 10. Nice, Turgus. Excellent. Nice. I'm glad. Hopefully everything tested well. And you had a very excellent stream coming back. Thank you so much for the raid, my friend. If there's anything you want to share, the drill, drop it in the chat. We're just, I think, rounding out our discussion on these. This very interesting, although it seems controversial paper on the demonstration of what there could be 3 potential species of the same family of dinosaur in a given area.
At the same exact time.
From
literally the same horizon. But, I don't know. Oh, they do have a limb bone. Shoot, they've got a... Oh, okay, hang on. Indeterminate lambeosaurine, right femur. Huh. Interesting. Yeah, they should cut that and see if they can get some growth rings out of it and figure out how old it was. But yeah, interesting.
Is it presumably not cut because it's that holotype again?
That one it looks like they didn't name. Yeah, because this is Lambeosaurinae indeterminate. But yeah. I'm glad they didn't name that one, I guess.
Is there a reason why you wouldn't name something off this?
Because limb bones are not as what we call diagnostic as skull bones. So like limb bones in dinosaurs, they tend not to have a lot of bells and whistles like skulls do, and so there's just not as much information in a limb bone to tell you what species it came from as opposed to a skull. Dinosaur skulls evolve very, very quickly, but limb bones do not. And you would need like a really, really big sample size of limb bones in order to be able to tell, like, oh yeah, well this particular species of dinosaur has limb bones that always look like this. Skulls are much more informative in terms of their anatomy.
Gotcha. Yeah. Except maybe the fusion part.
Yeah, fusion is not a good indicator of maturity, in my opinion. Yeah, yeah, um, yeah.
It's frustrating. It's frustrating, Danny. I want to know if these are three because I see the side of it suggesting about like why they could be just one species. Like we talked about the different sizes and developmental patterns
Uh-huh.
or variances in the animal, but then at the same
Yeah.
time, like you were saying, there are locations where they can coexist with having these multiple species.
Yep.
I think it's just getting back to the original point of like we need more samples.
Yeah, because at this stage, like, if you're trying to figure out what's the most parsimonious explanation here, um, like what requires the fewest assumptions, there are certain people will where they say, well, the most parsimonious assumption is that fossilization is such a rare event that like having the same species fossilized 3 times, it's not very likely. It's surely it's more likely that it's 3 different species. Or somebody like me would say, well, I don't know. I think the more parsimonious, view is that like these are probably all just the same animal, and like it requires a greater standard of evidence to demonstrate that they are different species. So like it's just kind of a fundamental philosophical difference there, and um, we're kind
Yes.
of at loggerheads with some of this stuff. And like when I was talking with Nick this past summer about some of this, we just kind of kept coming back to that idea. It's like, what actually is the most parsimonious scenario? And we just have very, very different views on that. So, like, scientists can disagree, and I think that's important to talk about with the chat. Is that like it doesn't have to turn into a knockdown, drag out fight. We don't have to, scream at each other or it's like at the end of the day, we all should be on the same team. We're all trying to figure out what's really going on here, and we just have differences in opinion. And someday we'll figure it out, and we'll shake hands. You know?
See, I
Yeah.
was
And
gonna.
actually, Nick Longrich, he brought that up. He's like my favorite phrase for this kind of thing is like, you know what? I disagree, but I'll bet you a beer on this. And someday like we'll figure out who's right and who's wrong, and then one of us will buy the other a beer, at a scientific meeting someday,
I love that.
And like I like that view.
Yeah.
It's yeah,
Yeah, and I was just
yeah,
gonna say for me the most parsimonious view was your viewpoint. I was like it would seem to be more likely that it's the same three species that would be, or the one species that would be preserved thrice instead of each time having be something different. But again, like it
uh-huh.
just goes kind of back to like how you look through that keyhole.
Yep, yep, yeah, yeah,
And I mean I think that's what makes these papers fun too. Is there's a lot of like these thought experiments that we can be putting in and like showing our own conceptions about what we think biological principles are and like the differences in
yep,
opinion and how we test for it. And that's what makes it really fun and really cool. And that's why I love these crossovers too. Is that it's a lot of fun to
yeah.
think about these
Just
things.
it is, and like just bouncing ideas off one another and seeing things from a different perspective. I don't know. This is why I look forward to this every week, Balloon.
Me too.
Yeah, yeah.
With that, Danny, I think I should let you go. It's been our 15 minutes. Do you want to let the par people know what's coming up on paleontologizing?
Oh yeah. Well, we've got Thursday Birds Day coming up tomorrow, and then I think on Friday we might be having a special stream for World Pangolin Day, uh, which is actually on Saturday. It's on the 17th, but we might do it a day early, so I can stream on that day. But we'll be talking all about pangolins, which are these wonderful scaly mammals. Um, they are incredibly weird and cool and super endangered. um, they're one of the most trafficked animals in the world. So their scales are with these animals are like killed. They're poached, they're killed, they're smuggled, and their scales are ground up for use in like traditional medicine, which doesn't work. You might as well grind up your own fingernails and take that in pill form because it's made of the same thing, made of keratin. Anyway, pangolins are incredibly cool animals, and anybody who tunes in for that stream, I guarantee you will fall in love with these critters. They are so cool and interesting. So tune in for World Pangolin Day on Friday.
I remember that from last year. It was a great episode last year as well. Actually, since my little brother and my mom went to Africa for a safari, and
Yeah,
Adam saw a pangolin. The tour guide said they hadn't seen one for 20 years. And
that's the giant ground pangolin, which is the biggest one in the world, is out on the African savannah. That's so special to be able to see that.
yeah.
Holy cow! Yeah, and these are such cool animals. Like, I don't know, when I first show them on stream, half of chat goes like, oh, like all in unison, everyone screams like, oh, that looks like a Pokemon. That's not real. It's like, no, it's a real animal. And they can curl themselves into a ball. There's a video that I'll show of a giant ground pangolin being harassed by some lions, and the lions are like using their teeth and their claws, just like trying to rip this thing apart, and it's just rolled up into a ball. It looks kind of like a yellow avocado, or something like that. And it's just this impenetrable armored ball, and the lions just eventually get bored and walk away after like trying for an hour to try and pry this thing apart and eat it. They just couldn't do it. Pangolins are so cool. They're so cool.
I mean, that is the Sand Slash Pokemon, Danny.
Yeah. Oh, wait, the what?
The
Sorry, I
Pokemon
missed that.
that looks like Sand Slash.
Nice.
That I think that's why, because it, to me, right, looks very much like a Pokemon, and I 100% see the similarity of like the
Oh,
pangolin,
that's probably
right.
what they were probably drawing from a pangolin. They do have pretty big claws because they do a lot of digging. They
Yep.
can actually dig through concrete.
Yeah.
Which is pretty amazing. Yeah, and they've got those scales on their back. But if you like cross this with a did I say avocado? I meant artichoke.
I like the. I was like,
Sorry, it's
I'm gonna
getting
go
late,
with it.
but-
All right, let's do it.
Well, artichoke with the kind of like scaly pattern there. Yeah, that would be. Yeah. Anyway, tune in to see pangolins, everybody, on Friday. That's going to be a lot of fun.
And chat, I'm not kidding. It's seriously the best stream on Twitch. Please go follow our friend Danny.
Oh.
Heart at the top of the chat. It means you're not following yet. You want to click that heart button and fix it right now, and your life will change. You will be like, where has this been in my life? This is the best stream ever. Seriously, Danny, thank you for everything you do.
Thank you,
Streaming here
Belinda.
on Twitch, teaching people science, inspiring us to be a part on streaming on Twitch. You know, the science panel that we organize, like, you are serious. I don't just say it. You are our SciComm hero. Thank you for everything you do.
That means more to me than I think you realize, Belen. Holy cow. And thank you for everything that you do and for being such a hospitable host, as usual. This is always a joy being able to do this. And the kind of stuff that you're doing for science literacy here on Twitch is pretty astonishing. Like, and just the dedication that you show streaming, like 8 streams a week, is it's incredible. And I'm really glad that you've had such a big followership lately, and I hope that continues.
Thank you, my friend. I am grateful for your friendship as well.
Likewise, Belen. Likewise. Yeah. Anyway, I should get going, but thanks again, and everybody. I wish I could stay for another several hours here, but man, it's getting late here, and I gotta eat some dinner. All of you lucky chatters get to continue learning about science with Belen here, and I'm envious of you for that. So enjoy.
Thank you, Danny. Have a great dinner. I will see you tomorrow for Thursday Birds Day, and then we'll be back here next week for our next crossover. Have a good night, Danny.
Sounds good. Take care. Bye-bye.
All right, y'all. That was the lovely and amazing Professor Danny Anduza. I think that was a lot of fun, y'all. It was a very... I love the unique papers that we cover, chat. Like, again, we went from everything from ant behavior and neuroscience and signaling peptides and magnetic detection and how that ties back to dinosaurs, to talking about new species of dinosaurs and how we define new species and how that works in dinosaurs. It was a lot of fun, as it always